Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Nancy left the school. Peter walked beside her, as usual. "But why are you leaving today?" "No, I guess I can't." Clara said she had to weed the potatoes. Nancy sighed. Ever since her father had brought that woman into the house, Nancy's life had been a living hell. Clara had looked for gain everywhere, and of course she had found it. Father worked in town, a week there, a week at home. The week he was home was easier, of course. But when he was away, it started. The first thing, the stepmother decided to expand the vegetable garden and increase the number of livestock in the yard. Dad supported all her ideas, and Clara said, "As soon as the farm starts to bring profit, you can quit this job and work at home." "It would be good, Clara. I miss you and my daughter." The woman was pleased. She smiled. While Daddy was away, all the hard work was on Nancy's shoulders, but she didn't complain. She really wanted Daddy home too. Clara went to the market every 3 days. Nancy didn't know how much money she made there. But it must have been pretty good, because after a year, Daddy quit. The girl thought things would get easier, but it turned out to be much worse. On the first day, when the father was free at dinner, Clara said, "From tomorrow, we start building a new one. I've already ordered the material." "Clara, why is this stable only 5 years old?" "Well, this one's not going anywhere. There'll be an extra one." Father just sighed. Lately, they had only numbers instead of love in their eyes. Then he built a stable and a barn and a chicken coop. But Nancy began to notice that her father smelled more and more of drink. And there was such sadness in his eyes. Clara shouted she could warm him with a broom, but he kept drinking milk. Very soon, all the hard work again fell on her shoulders, because her father often could not do anything. The village grandmothers sighed. Such a man was ruined by his rubles, not a woman. Clara knew exactly what was being said about her. She argued and fought, almost throwing herself at everyone. Pretty soon, people in the village didn't even say hello to her, and she didn't care, to tell the truth. She didn't take anything from anyone. She earned everything herself. All the alkies and idlers, let them bite their elbows in silent envy. "Peter, you're not going to win a gold medal anyway." Nancy waved her hand. "Why do I need it, this gold medal?" "To put it in my room and admire it." "You wanted to go to college, didn't you?" "Who's going to let me go to that institute?" "My father on his hands and knees. Every day on the farm is huge." She sighed. Peter looked at her in amazement. "Nancy, what's wrong with you? You're out of your mind. You're the best in the whole school." "You wanted to be. How could I?" Nancy looked up at the sky. "It's okay. I'll get over it. Most people do. They get married, have kids, take care of the household. It's a different time. Peter, leave me alone. It is better to tell your grandfather how normal limping and a little so good." Nancy smiled. A week ago, a terrible event shook the village. It had long been said that the wolves were coming too close to the village, they said. But it's no use. They had a forester. If you could catch him sober once a week. They hoped that nothing terrible would happen. They were wrong. One night, the wolves swarmed the neighbor's fence and tried to take the dog off the chain. The owner jumped out. Neighbors. And Peter's grandfather, who is 100 years old. One didn't hesitate. Immediately grabbed the barrel from the wall. Yes, also in the yard to grab who grabbed? But only age gave its own way. The grandfather got confused and swung at the wolf in his leg. It's good that it only hit the soft part. But the rumble scared the wolves too. As they say, it was both a laugh and a sin. The grandfathers treated the whole village. Peter had only his mother and grandfather, so there wasn't much wealth. Everyone carried something tasty or useful to Grandpa Nick, who sacrificed himself for the sake of the rescue. Only one family was left out. And that, of course, was Nancy's family. Clara immediately said, "Well, if a man is a fool, it's forever. There's nothing to jump around like a young man at that age." Papa was as usual under the influence, and Nancy wouldn't even try. She was never listened to at all. "You told your grandfather to correct himself. Listen, Nancy, which field are you going to weed?" "The farthest one, the one behind the village. So let me come and help you." "Don't, Peter. No need." Don't you have your own things to do? Nancy said she realized that Peter would come and help, and they could spend the saved time on the river. And it made her so happy. And it appeared that you were all with Peter and 3 horses. You'll be on the street in no time. If you were a person, you'd be a country bumpkin nobody needs. Wouldn't you look at normal people? Nancy didn't even pay attention. That's how her stepmother always greeted her. Not Peter, not Peter, not Peter, not Peter, not Peter, not Peter. She'd think of something else. No matter how Nancy arrived, she'd be bombarded with accusations from the very doorstep. What she's hiding? Your daddy dragged your drunkard around on his back. Your back is gnawing at you too. Don't even think about it. Don't forget you're on potatoes. I remember about your potatoes. Nancy couldn't hold back any longer. She wanted to shout and stomp her feet, but she realized that the task would then fall on her head even more. Why is she mine? Are you guys eating with your daddy? Or maybe you eat air? Clara put her hands to her sides. Nancy realized that a scandal was about to break out, and it would look like a one-actor play, so it wouldn't come to that. She decided to take no offense and go straight to the field. Quickly, she changed her clothes. As Clara positioned herself and stepped out the door, she was already on her 3rd furrow. When did Peter show up? Not alone, but with his grandfather. Good health and truth. Hello, Grandpa Nick. How's your leg? What's it going to do? She walks more out of habit than anything else. She's long forgotten what pain is. Why is it walking and not like this in this heat? And what's the use of weeding it? We'll be digging soon enough. Nancy sighed. Grandfather grinned into his mustache. He was a wise, kind man. I know, don't say anything. Yours in the store is already scandalized by the wrong color of sugar. She needs yellow, and the store is white. Peter laughed. What's the difference? I thought yellow was bad. Well, I don't know. It is kind of considered to be sweeter. Grandfather sat down on the grass, looked at his grandson. Why don't you get up and go help the girl? Peter stood next to her, and they started pulling the grass with fury. Soon I smelled smoke. Grandpa had built a fire at the edge of the field. Dropped some potatoes from behind his sinuses, took out cucumbers, tomatoes. When there was less than half left, he called them over for a snack. Nancy had never had such a good meal. Obviously, of course, it's just potatoes. But how delicious. In general, in the company of Grandpa Nick and Peter, it was so homely, so nice and quiet. I knew your stepmother when she was a girl. That's why she doesn't like me so much. She's from a good family. Her father's a hard worker. Her mother killed his wife, and she's already driven one man to his grave. But she didn't get anything from the big farm. Her sister came to the funeral, and it turned out that the house and everything that belonged to it belonged to her. Only that Pebbles didn't tell her about it. In general, the stepmother lost everything. Then she stuck to your father. Nancy stretched out thoughtfully. I wonder if Dad knows about it. Is Dad so in love with Clara that he doesn't notice? Yeah, there was a time when they were dating. Didn't anyone say anything to him? I can't help you there. I haven't seen your father in a while. And if I do, he's in no condition to talk. He drinks a lot. He drinks a lot. This guy was drinking at her place. Nancy at night, when she was already asleep, decided that as soon as she finished school, she'd go somewhere and take her father with her. He'd quit drinking, she'd make him, she'd talk him into it, and they'd get along. They'll be fine. And this one's got to run this place by herself. And winter was a little easier. Didn't have to be in the field, didn't have to be in the bed. Nancy even went for a walk once in a while. Peter, like a faithful guardian, was always there. To be honest, sometimes I'd like to be without him. But somewhere he'd take offense. In general, Nancy had more and more often thought that she should just marry well. Molly is only 2 years older than Nancy, and she got married in the next big village. Her husband, though older, treats her like a porcelain doll. Molly's mother told me that he takes her to school in the city by car and takes her back. Not only does he have a car, but he doesn't let her study. If Nancy could find such a man, she'd marry him right away. Is Peter going to find a new subject in her life? On the other hand, Nancy realized that such luck was not common. Spring had come. Graduation exams loomed ahead. And what? and Nancy didn't know yet. There was no talking to her father about it, but her stepmother, much less what she would tell her. And also, understandably, well, something had to be done. So Nancy made up her mind, choosing a day when the stepmother was in a pretty decent mood. Nancy sat down at the table in front of her. Clara, yes, she took a break from her calculations and looked at Nancy. That I should talk to you. The stepmother put aside the papers. Her face was serious. Well, let's have a talk. Nancy could see that the stepmother knew exactly what the conversation was about. Graduation is coming up. We have to apply somewhere. The stepmother grinned, not very friendly. We're somewhere else? But to the place where I'm going to study. The stepmother grinned and said, Will your daddy, or will I be someone else's aunt? You realize that my relative is of no use to me. Nancy blushed. Of course, there was logic in her stepmother's words. Her father had long since given her the finger. But what should Nancy do? You realize, Nancy, if you don't help with the chores, I'll have to hire a man. And that's a lot of money. So, no matter how hard I try, I can't give you any money. Anyway, if you're washing your hands of it, there's no reason for you to come here. So if you decide to go to school, I'll sell my family. You can forget it. Nancy almost cried. She'd been expecting something like that. But it was still a shame. But everybody goes to school. You're not everybody. You're in a completely different situation. Am I wrong? That's it. I think I've explained everything clearly to you. The stepmother got up and walked out. Nancy burst into tears. It's exactly as she thought. She's going to rot in this village like this. For a few days, Nancy walked on her own, not her mood. She even decided she wouldn't go to the prom. Peter was so annoying that there was no energy. One day, she came from school, sat on a bench in the yard, and sat in the barn. She heard a rustle. Strange. Stepmother left for the market in the morning. How'd she even get her driver's license? She bought herself a car, an old Jeep. She's been going into town a lot more often. Who's there? The girl carefully stood up, wanted to go to the door, but it opened by itself. Her father's head appeared. He was very drunk, and it was immediately obvious. Nancy sighed bitterly. Nancy doesn't have this one. And then Nancy was so angry that tears sprang from her eyes. What's it to you? Who's here? Who isn't? You can't see anybody anyway. You don't care about anyone but yourself. Dad, why do you hate me so much? Giving me to someone else's aunt. You're the one who's watering your eyes. Nancy, what are you talking about? What's the matter? I don't know what you're talking about. What am I saying? You know that everyone will go to school after high school. Your daughter will continue to clean cow's dung because Grandma doesn't want to do anything. He's more interested in drinking every day than thinking about his daughter. Nancy, wait, and don't cry. But the girl had already run into the house. Kevin sat down on the bench where his daughter had just sat and stared at himself. What a headache from all sorts of thoughts. The man raised his head and saw Grandfather Nick at the gate. Healthy. Grandpa's sick. I don't understand anything. Things are happening at home. Kevin waved his hand. No, she's gone to town. Grandpa Nick went into the yard, sat down next to her. What are you doing, Kevin? Peter says your girl won't let you go to school. Why not? But it's not for 1 year. You have to support her. Don't we have money? Maybe yours does. But I don't think you do. So what's the deal? Kevin lowered his head. He'd been tempted to come out of the barn just now. Nancy had heard her father and Clara talking in the kitchen that evening, talking rather than yelling and arguing. It was very strange because in the last couple years, normally they hadn't communicated at all. The girl tried to listen, but she couldn't make out the words. Half an hour later, Clara stopped by. Nancy, an idea how about us? The girl came out at the table, sat her father. He was gloomy. Clara pointed to a chair. Sit down. Nancy sat down. She looked at her father in amazement. Apparently, he was sober. Nothing to say. Stepmother. Nancy, your daddy swears he won't take another drop in his mouth. And he says he'll work 3 jobs just to keep you in school. And I can agree to that. But on one condition, if your dad gets drunk once, you drop out of school. Nancy agreed to everything. She realized that the most important thing was to get out of here. Then she'd figure it out. maybe get a job, maybe something else. Nancy was already dreaming of a very different life. She didn't really know what it was like to live in the city. And to be honest, she didn't know what she'd do there all day long. But she wanted it so badly. A few years went by. Nancy had just gotten her paramedic's diploma and was about to get a job. She had a young man she planned to marry in the future. True, he wasn't a star, but he was a city boy. And he had an apartment, but he lived with his mom. But that didn't frighten Nancy. She was determined to be a good daughter-in-law. She had little contact with her father and stepmother. She went to see them once every 6 months and tried to get away as soon as possible. Nancy, there's an emergency phone call for you. The door of the dorm room opened, and Nancy saw the janitor on the doorstep. It was strange. Usually she was very reluctant to have any of the residents on the phone. Nancy walked out of the room. First she walked, then she ran. The receiver was on the table. Hello, Nancy. It's Andrew. Yes, Andrew, I'm listening. Here's the thing. Well, Nancy's dead. Yours were going to the city. Something apparently happened to the car. They flew into the ditch. There's a tree there. You need to solve everything here. Nancy dropped the phone, then slowly settled on the floor. How come? Someone handed her some water. Someone helped her into a chair. Nancy sat at the head of the table. Some of the neighbors gathered around the table. What grief is not old? He would have lived and lived. Yes, if he took a man to his senses. Even Garika began to restrain her, they said, and she somehow became calmer when he stopped drinking. A woman needs a real man, not a body. Nancy heard through the fog, but only one thing was going through her head. What to do now? When everyone had gone, Nancy began to wash the dishes. There was a knock at the door. Who was it? It was Peter. Nancy hadn't seen him in a long time. Probably the last time. How did he get into the army? Hello on the walls. Hello, Peter. I don't recognize you. And it was true. Peter had matured from a tall and gangly man to a sturdy tall man. Peter, where are you from? Yes, I came to see my mother. She said you're here to drop by. Peter sat down at the table and looked around the kitchen. Well, it's you. I'm sorry for your loss. Thanks, Peter. She finished cleaning up, looked at him. Would you like a drink? Let's sit and remember Uncle Kolya. And his Clara, too. He was a man after all. Nancy put some sandwiches, a bottle, and a shot glass in front of him. Don't you have one for yourself? I don't drink. You can't drink. They're not strangers to you. Have a little drink and you'll feel better. I'm telling you. Nancy sighed and put down another shot. She tried it with the girls in the dorm, but it hadn't worked. Nancy, it didn't taste good. Nasty. You haven't smelled it. Drink as much as you can in one gulp and don't breathe. Pick a snack or some compote. Nancy did just that. The aftertaste wasn't great, of course, but it wasn't as bad as before. And after a few minutes, she felt her muscles relaxing, getting lighter. So let's do it again. Come on. Nancy woke up with a wild headache. She had absolutely no memory of going to bed last night. I turned my head and was amazed. Peter was sleeping next to me. Shit. What a funeral. She was out of her mind. The most frustrating thing was that she couldn't remember anything. Peter. He moved and turned to her. Nancy, but you're a fire. I tell you, you should drink more often. Peter, get out. Now before the village gets up and you what? I'm an adult. Go away. I'm begging you. Nancy didn't know what to say, so she blurted it out. I have a fiancé. Peter's eyes narrowed. A fiancé, you say? Why'd you jump into bed with me? Yeah, I'm the one who jumped into your bed. All right, I'll be right out. Peter got off in 2 seconds and walked out. Nancy cried. She didn't want to. She didn't want anything. After her childhood friend left, there was a lingering residue on her soul, as if she had wronged someone undeservedly. In the morning, Nancy went to the cemetery, sat on the fresh graves for a while. She cried, and on her way back, she saw Nick's grandfather. He was obviously waiting for her. Hello, Nancy. Hello, Grandpa Nick. I wanted to talk to you, Nancy. The girl blushed thickly. Old man, I haven't slept at all. Not at all. But I haven't slept today either. You know Peter is mine. I saw how he jumped out of your arms. He's going to town today. Mother's crying, and my heart's breaking too. He came here and promised to stay. What happened? Nancy. What could Nancy say to him? She thought that if she told him everything, all her dreams of the city, of city life, would come to an end. She loved the country, of course, but not so much that she couldn't even try to leave. And on the other hand, Peter, he had become such a city girl, her suitor was nowhere near him. Grandpa Nick, nothing happened. It was just sitting around. Nancy walked around the old man and down the path. She could feel his gaze burning her back, but she didn't turn around. 3 days later, she was leaving. She'd seen a glimpse of Peter still here, so she calmed down. Well, good, as much as she doesn't like him. And to connect her life with him she does not want. She knows him. Counting from diapers, what can be interesting in him? She's already packed her things and checked everything. What's off? What's not? Behind the household while the neighbor watches. Nancy promised to give her a young chick for it. The neighbor, the mother of the Molly that Nancy had once invited, sighed. Don't you worry, Nancy. I'll review everything. I'll do everything. Ninka will help. For the tree. Thank you. It's not easy for us right now. Molly, is Molly here, Nancy? Where would she be? She was married. You said it was fine. Aunt Kathy waved her hand. What was I supposed to say? That I got married over the summer, and there wasn't a day that went by without a beating. But I'd put up with it as long as I could. Then I had the baby in my arms. We barely fought off the bastard. Nancy was confused. Molly's life had been an example to her for so many years, and now this revelation. The neighbor left. Nancy sat down in the driveway. Nancy, that was Peter's voice. Is something wrong? She ran outside. Peter was almost to the door. Nancy, Grandpa's sick. Help me. It's the paramedic. Our paramedic's on his 3rd day. Nancy rushed into the house, grabbed the first aid kit she always carried in her bag. Didn't even lock the door. So she ran. Peter was running beside her, and he said he'd been pale in the morning, breathing hard. And at lunchtime, he got up from the couch and sat down again. I asked him what, and he just waved me off. He's not feeling well at all now. Nancy, help me. She stopped abruptly, so much so that Peter ran into her. Because I'll do what I can, but you have to understand. How old is Nick 94's grandfather? He sighed like he was going to cry. Nancy silently skipped onward. Grandfather was very ill indeed. He was lying on the sofa and breathing with difficulty. Nancy immediately realized that he had a heart attack. She crouched down beside him and rummaged through the medicine cabinet. An hour later, he was feeling much better. Grandpa Nick, do you need to go to the hospital? I'm not going anywhere. That's all I need. I'll die at home. Grandpa said indignantly, What do you mean, die? Get those thoughts out of your head. Grandfather grinned, looked at his grandson. Do you think that at 94 life only begins? No, grandson. Everyone has his own destiny. And it's foolish to try to cheat fate. I've had a good life. Guys, everybody who's turning 70 has already cleaned up. Nancy and Peter went outside. Peter, I don't know what to do. To be honest, Grandpa Nick's condition is not good. He's not going to the hospital. I know my grandfather. Nancy looked at Peter, realized that he really cared about his grandfather. But you say the paramedic is drinking, and I have to go. Go. Peter wouldn't look at her. Peter, but I really need to go to my new job. No one's waiting for me. It's not like I'm holding you back, and I understand. Thanks for coming to see you off. Did Nancy shake her head? No, you don't have to. Go on then. There's a bus in an hour. Nancy walked down the street. After a minute, she turned around. But Peter was no longer in the yard. For the first time in her life, she wanted to stay in the village. She walked around the yard, figured out the dog behind his ear, then sat down on the bench. What am I going to do? She sat like that, looking at her watch. The bus had long gone. And what will she go tomorrow? Talk to Andrew, tell him what prospects in the village. And there's no problem with money here. What a farm she has. Nancy didn't know whether she was doing the right thing or not, but she had to decide something. She went to bed with a heavy heart. In the morning, she decided to go. What to do here? When the bus came and she got on, she saw Peter running to his house. Then he immediately closed his eyes again. Grandpa Nick had died. She learned about it from Sveta the girl, from their village I met by chance in town. Nancy tried not to blame herself. She understood perfectly well that Nick's grandfather would never get out. But she realized what Peter thought of her. A week later, she went to Andrew. Strange that he hadn't shown up in the meantime. His mom opened the door. Nancy hadn't seen her yet, and to be honest, she kind of scared her right off. "Hello, Andrew's home. Who are you?" "Not Nancy." "Nancy." The girl tried to smile. "You shouldn't come here anymore, Nancy." Andrew met a nice city girl. Well-mannered. She was taken aback. "What do you mean, met?" He knew I was going to the funeral. But he knew what. "Tell me what you can give to your family. You don't have a job yet. No parents to help now." Nancy even began to gasp for air at such accusations, then spoke out. "Well, yes, I guess it's nothing you dream of, is it? But only if the house I've got is worth more than your apartment or the farm, for which I got a very large sum. But you don't care about that now, do you? Goodbye." She ran downstairs. Tears rolled from her eyes. The steps merged into one. That same day, Nancy threw all her things into a suitcase and left for the village. Yes, fuck it all. People live in the village, especially with her profession. In the evening, someone knocked quietly on the door. Yes, there was Andrew. "Hello, Nancy." She threw herself on the back of a chair and looked at him with interest. God, what did she see in him? He was a skinny, long guy with glasses. Pale hands, pale forehead, sweating all the time. She's like her mom said, "You're letting out a rich bride." "Why would you do that?" "I just missed you." "I missed you." "That's good." "I said some things to your mom in there." "It's okay. My mom's not a very good character. You'll have to forgive her for not talking to her so nicely the whole time they knew each other." Nancy suddenly burst into tears. "It's a shame. Is she so ugly that you can love her for her inheritance?" "Andrew, you see, what's the matter?" Nancy looked at Andrew, who was sitting on her bed, and grinned. "You're a very good man. Do I need you that much? I inherited a lot of debt." Andrew from the villages. "What debts?" Nancy's getting a little carried away. "What kind of debts?" "Strange. That's strange." "Andrew, it's nothing. I just remembered I have to go somewhere urgently. I'll meet you tomorrow." He quickly sneezed on those slits and vanished. There's no other name for it because Andrew never stonked. In fact, he looked more like a ghost. Nancy threw herself on the bed and burst into tears at what was wrong with her. What? She'd gotten a pretty good education, so she fell asleep and thought. In the morning, I packed all my things. She got on the bus. She went out and looked around. But isn't it beautiful? At the edge of the village, construction was boiling. She heard they were building a new club. It will be called the House of Culture. You can live anywhere, and the saying, where you're born, there you are. You shouldn't forget it at all. She entered her yard and left the yard with new eyes. That's good. There's the house. I haven't seen Peter Nancy. She'd walked by their house a few times on purpose, but he either didn't see it or didn't want to come out. Probably the latter. It's all right. He'll get over it. He'll understand, and they'll make up. Nancy realized more and more every day that she wanted to be with him, wanted to live together, to have children together. 2 weeks passed. During that time, Nancy sold most of the farm, keeping some for herself, of course. She also became very good friends with Molly. They hadn't talked much before because Molly was older. Nancy didn't recognize her at first. Skinny, kind of brooding, but then she got over it. They got to talking. One night when they were having tea, Molly asked Nancy, "What do you think of the job?" "I don't know. I'll have to go to the headmaster, see what he suggests, or the nurse's station." "There's a paramedic." Molly laughed too. "What kind of paramedic is he?" "Well, you know, it's embarrassing to put a man down like that. Stop thinking about people. They're alcoholics about it." All night Nancy thought about it. It's true, nobody thinks about her. Why should she? Especially since Molly's right not to. In the morning, she picked up her papers and headed for the office. Andrew used to be called chairman, but now he's a director. What difference does it make, really? He was the one who dealt with all matters in the village. "Oh, Nancy, they told me you were back, and I thought it was for good. Or is it business?" "Business, Andrew. It's about the principal's job. Rubbing my hands together. So you're back for good, not running away." "Yeah, it's not in the plans yet." He looked at her real hard. "See, I'm gonna hire you now. You later. Come on, Andrew. I'm not 18, I said I'll be here." After an hour of negotiation, when the acting paramedic was called in and sprayed around with fumes of booze, he thanked her profusely for getting rid of such a responsibility. Nancy received the keys to the nurse's station in her hands. She stared at them in amazement, but she was a real person now. Straight from the office, she went to the nurse's station. The grass is higher than the fence. The path is narrow to the door. Yeah, the old paramedic didn't bother much. Nancy's had enough and rolled up his sleeves. Now she can do what she really needs to do. No one showed up at the nurse's station. At least 2 weeks. Dust lay everywhere. The few instruments that had been messed with piled on a table. An hour or two later, the door opened and Nancy heard Molly's voice. "Nancy, are you here?" Nancy looked out here. "Where else would I be?" Molly laughed. "Oh, I can't. Have you seen yourself?" Nancy wiped the streaks on her cheek, fixed her hair, which immediately jumped back into free flight. "Come on, neighbor, help me out instead of laughing. It's a two-handed job." The work went faster. By evening, the insides of the medical center were shining and glistening. They walked out. Nancy sighed tiredly. "I'll have to put all this beauty out tomorrow myself. Listen, ask your mother if you can plant any more flowers now." "I will. We'll have to ask the men to mow." "I don't want to ask anyone myself." In the morning, Nancy got up early, gave her a cow, put her out in the herd. She was immediately surrounded by the village women. "Nancy, is it true you are a paramedic now?" She smiled. "Isn't it true? And that every day you will work and even come like that?" Today she put on more orders. "And from tomorrow, you're welcome. Just think, just a little while ago you were a girl running around, and now you're a doctor. It's crazy." Nancy, it was nice to hear all that. She was starting to feel proud of herself. I mean, what did she need in that town? She's got everything. A big house, good money, a job. And if she works hard, she'll get a lot of respect. And then maybe Peter will hear about what she's like. And he'll come to her. Nancy realized that they were adults, that they could talk. But she knew Peter well. He wouldn't be the first to talk. On the first day that the nurse's station was to be open, Nancy, before she reached it, saw a crowd of old ladies outside. She realized perfectly well that today she would have an exam. There was no other way to call it. And of course, everyone got sick all at once. Molly, who was walking next to her, she was taking her daughter to kindergarten when she whistled. "Well, friend, you can't get it all sorted out by tomorrow." Nancy smiled. "It's okay, I can handle it." By lunchtime, the line had visibly settled down. Nancy could feel her stomach rumbling. Her patient heard it. "When did the appointment end?" She came out and said, "Takshi. Our doctor's tummy's already rumbling. Give me some tea at least, girls." Everyone agreed without complaint, for which Nancy was very grateful to him. Half an hour later, she looked out into the corridor a little more rested and cheerful. Who was next for health? By evening, all the old ladies went home satisfied. The director dropped by and asked if he needed anything. Nancy, with a nice smile, handed him the list and added that it was very urgent. The principal looked perplexed at the double sheet, which had been and written off on all sides. "What is all this stuff anyway?" "Yup, everything, nothing could be left out." He scratched the back of his head. "Didn't I overreact by putting you in Peter's place?" Nancy remained silent. Andrew sighed and walked out. She never saw Peter again. Then Molly told her he was working on some city job, felling timber into plots. He only comes home on Saturday to pray, sleep, and then go back to the woods. But not the same ones at his house. It's been 2 months since Nancy started work. The grandmothers were happy. That's the main thing. At that age, they don't want medicine so much as attention. Of course, there have been younger people who've come in. Nancy had 2 of them rushed to the hospital. One man with appendicitis, the other with kidney pain. I mean, Nancy couldn't be 100% sure without tests. But it looked a lot like stones. As it turns out, she wasn't wrong. The hospital said a couple more days, and there'd be no one left to treat. It was the end of a normal workday. The weather was bad outside, so there weren't many patients today. Nancy was just about to close the medicine safe when the door slammed. And someone yelled, "Doctor is doctor." Nancy jumped out of the office. "Peter," Nancy almost fainted. Peter was in such a state. "Daughter here." One of the men looked at her fearfully. "Here on the couch." Peter was put on the couch. "Somebody get Frank. If he's sober, get him over here." The younger one nodded and ran out of the infirmary. Nancy, on the other hand, examined Peter several times on the head. "Looks like the bones are intact. The wounds are superficial. His arm is hanging by a whip from his shoulder. Look, we need to avoid the city. If possible, the forest is the only place where our men can make money. If this gets out, we'll lose all our jobs. Are you crazy? A man can die." "I understand. I'm saying if it's possible." Lucky for Nancy, Frank was sober. He walked briskly into the office. He glanced at Peter. "What do we do? Let's take it one step at a time. Let's start with the head." An hour later, Nancy put in the last stitch. Frank smiled approvingly. "Good job." Peter opened his eyes. Nancy, lying quietly still. He smiled again and closed his eyes. The arm turned out to be dislocated. Frank helped. Peter screamed and finally passed out. "Nothing, just a little soreness, that's all." Peter's mother literally flew into the nurse's station. She threw herself at the man who asked not to send Peter to town, that he was satisfied. Sitting there, "You'd better fall through the ground, Gad." The man turned away from her clapping and said nothing. As Frank explained, he was the cheerleader. "Calm down, Vanessa. Like you don't know your son. He's the first to go everywhere." A woman looked in on her. "Nancy, don't worry. Everything will be fine. I'll be here with him till morning. I'll stay with you too. You don't have to. I'll be fine." Peter woke up in the middle of the night, looked around the nurse's station with a hazy gaze, stopped it on Nancy and Nancy sleeping at the table. Dropped off. "Peter, how are you feeling?" "Who knows? Not so good. You're very lucky. You only took the glancing blow to the head." "Yeah, lucky. So lucky." Peter was transported home in the morning. Vanessa, his mother, thanked Nancy for a long time. Then she said, "Nancy, you're coming." "Well, of course, I'll come back every day to change the bandages. Treat them. Then the live ones have to come off." Nancy ran to Peter's house every day. Except the easier Peter got on him, the gloomier he looked. One day he said to Nancy, "You can go no more? Peter, you don't have to." She realized he wasn't talking at all about her looking after him as a doctor, but specifically about their relationship. Tears came to her eyes. "You're sure?" "I'm sure of it. You said yourself you wanted to marry a city man, so I'll stay out of the way." Nancy wanted to say something, but Peter beat her to it. "Anyway, I'm getting married soon. I got a fiancé." Nancy ran out of the house like a scalded man. All the way home, she ran and cried. She calmed down a little at home. It's just Peter freaking out. Anyone would freak out if they were him. Well, he'll calm down a little, and then they'll talk. Time passed. Peter didn't make any moves. Then she found out he'd gone into the woods again. Nancy was furious. "Oh yeah, to hell with you. William's been after her for a long time. The boy from the neighboring village. She'll get Peter." A day later, William showed up with a chocolate bar. He sat in silence. Then he said tomorrow's a day off to the club. "Some artists are coming. Why don't we go?" He said he was hopelessly sure he'd be turned down. "Shall we go?" William jumped, didn't he? "I'll pick you up at 6 o'clock tomorrow." "All right then." Nancy felt absolutely nothing for William, not disgust, not sympathy. It was just the man and the man and the man. All that was on her mind was Peter. Had he really told her the truth? No way. He was just trying to annoy her. Nancy was sure of it. It was all right, Peter. She could be angry too. Of course, she knew perfectly well that it was all a kindergarten, but she couldn't help it. It wasn't nice to William. She didn't promise anything like that, though. He didn't say anything like that. He invited her to a club. She said yes. William knocked on the door. Minute to minute. Nancy wasn't quite ready yet. Yeah, come in. He went in, took a look around. It's quite a place. Even bigger on the inside than it was on the outside. Nancy laughed. That doesn't make sense. The house can't be bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. William smiled too and touched the big TV. Do you have a household too? I do. What's a village without a farm? A big one. No, a couple of piglets, a cow, and some small things. The man looked at her with admiration. How do you manage? Nancy laughed. What's a farm? Tears. We used to have a farm. You could drag your feet. You probably know that yourself. Know how. Are you sure? You're not from our village. William sighed. I am. My mom managed to give birth to me. 4 houses left. No road. So we'd sell the house and move somewhere closer. The man laughed. Who needs it in that remote area? It's almost 7 kilometers to work. Nancy sat down in front of him. But we have to do something. Go to Grigory Andreevich. William waved his hand. Went more than once. Do you know what he says to me? He says that in my family there is only one worker. It's not profitable to give a house. It's better to give a house to a family with several workers and children. Nancy shook her head. On the one hand, the director could be understood. But on the other hand, what should people do? Half an hour later, they walked towards the club. The crowd was apparently invisible. People from all the neighboring villages came to see the town's artists. She saw Peter. Her heart clenched, and Peter noticed her and immediately disappeared. Nancy turned her head for a long time, but she never saw where he had gone. It wasn't until they were already telling stories she noticed him. Peter came into the hall, holding some girl under his arm. Nancy was so cold. Wasn't he lying? He really does have a fiancée. The mood was ruined. She didn't see who was performing there, what was being sung. She just sat there staring in front of her. She clapped when other people clapped. After the concert, there was dancing. She saw Peter dancing with the same girl. There was only one thought in her head. She had to talk to him. Tell him they are both wrong. Peter pressed the girl very tightly against him, and she cried out. And then Nancy laughed, even felt sick. She grabbed William by the arm and dragged him to the dance floor. I can't dance. Nancy will learn. She clung to him and gradually moved closer to where Peter was dancing. He noticed her for a long look and then pressed his lips to that girl's lips. Nancy had nothing to do, and she immediately kissed William. The guy's eyes popped out of his forehead in surprise, and Peter was gone. How long did Nancy keep looking for him? But she never saw him again. William, I'm going home to the wall. How I think we are. That we have neither we nor we. I'm tired and sleepy. Can I at least walk you home? No, you can't. I just want to be alone. I see. Nancy realized she was being undeservedly rude to the guy, but she couldn't help it. She walked down the street. It was quiet, nice. Occasionally someone's dog would start barking, but they quickly calmed down. Nancy went to her wicket, sighed, pushed it open, and fell into someone's strong arms. What a bird. Peter, did you scare me? It's gonna happen. Peter smelled strongly of booze. Are you drunk? Go home. No way. How am I supposed to go home when you've been tailing me all night on purpose? Peter, what's wrong with you? He held her and wouldn't let go. Then he looked at her. I missed Peter. Nancy got scared. Peter, please go home. He picked her up in his arms and carried her towards Sarajevo. Peter, please don't, please, you don't have to be so loud that a respected paramedic is caught doing something indecent. You and I are about to engage in some very indecent activities. Peter. She resisted as long as she could. But Peter wasn't rude, he was just persistent. Toward morning, Peter silently got up and slipped out of the barn, but never said a word to her. Nancy had so hoped that now they would all finally talk and work things out. She could see that he cared for her. He's just made up his mind about some nonsense for some reason. But it's all right, she'll go and talk to him. And all day Nancy lay on the sofa, decided to give herself a real day off. She slept in. got up in the evening, made a salad, and collapsed in front of the TV again. The next day, almost as soon as Nancy got to work, William showed up, holding a bouquet of asters that grew in every yard, a solemn expression on his face. "Nancy, how have I missed you?" Nancy cocked an eyebrow in surprise. Then she remembered how she behaved with William, and blushed. It wasn't really his fault. She and Peter had brought him into the game. "William's not very nice, but no. But my mom's expecting us for dinner tonight. The principal has authorized the car to be taken after work." Nancy had just gathered the strength to reply as the door swung open. Standing on the doorstep was Molly. "Nancy, their Aunt Vanessa bad." Petkin and Mama went quickly. Nancy grabbed her suitcase, threw it to William. "You'll see for yourself later." They almost ran the distance to Peter's house. Molly told stories along the way. Peter was leaving in the morning, she and her mother. They had a long argument at the gate. And then Peter ducked into the car and drove off. Where did Nancy go? Where? Where to work? I don't know where, but apparently for a long time, because she had her suitcase with her. Aunt Vanessa sat on the bench with her head bowed. Mom says she thought she was crying, but she just sat there and sat there. So she ran to her, and her eyes were closed and her lips were white. Nancy Chegal was almost on autopilot. How could it be? How could he just pick up and leave? What about her? She refused to believe that Peter had run away again. Well, it can't go on like this forever. Aunt Vanessa really wasn't well. She tried to say something, but Nancy could already see that one side of her face was twisted. She gave her a shot, then another. "Molly, run to me, call an ambulance. Say stroke. Tell them I asked them to call. There's a number taped to the phone." And Molly looked frightened at Aunt Natasha and rushed to the station. There at the gate stood a confused William. "What's there, Nancy soon?" "What Nancy? A man is dying there." Molly waved her hand and rushed into the room. By the time the woman was taken away, there was a crowd outside her house. "Molly, look after mine today." "I'll go with her." "Sure, Nancy, no problem. But what about you?" "Figure it out. Andrew's here." "Go, Nancy." "How's the freebie?" "Call me at home. I'll send a car to pick you up." "Thanks a lot, Andrew." Nancy stayed in town till morning. Toward morning, the woman started to feel a little better. "But you're a medical professional. You must realize it's too early to make any predictions." "Let's hope the woman is a country woman, a sturdy one." Nancy looked at her watch. She was catching the first bus to the village. That would do it. At the same time on bus 1 and 3 will come again. The first person Nancy saw as she stepped down from the foot of the bus was. It was Andrew, the last person Nancy expected to see here at all. "Nancy, I've been waiting for you for a hell of a long time." "Andrew, what are you doing here anyway? But you're missing." "So I figured. Wait, you're supposed to be marrying a city girl who's no match for me." He wrinkled his nose crankily. "Stop it. It doesn't suit you. The marriage didn't work out because, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's like you're not happy to see me." What should Andrew squint at? "How fast have you changed?" "Andrew, what does it matter if I've changed or not? You have no business being here." She wanted to walk past, but Andrew walked beside her. "Nancy, I get it. You're hurt. You're angry. All right, I agree with you. But I think we know each other well enough to overlook little things like arguments." "Andrew, you really don't get it, do you?" Nancy stopped. "You can go back to your town in peace." "Nancy, what?" "I think we'll at least talk." "Are you giving me tea?" "No, I'm not giving you tea." "Nancy, I'm having difficulties. And I don't need support both mentally and financially." Nancy squinted angrily. "It's what they would go for you, Andrew, along with your mommy." Andrew stopped smiling too. He was just about to say something when a car stopped nearby. "Nancy, trouble." She turned around. William got out of the car. "William, it's just hooked up and it won't go away." William quickly stepped between her and Andrew. "Young man, you don't understand. You were told to go where you were going." Andrew spat. "You'll regret it," looking for shelter. Andrew turned around and walked away. And Nancy even gasped with indignation. William turned to her. "You're not a cow. You're very beautiful, Nancy. When we go to meet my mom. Jesus, William, you too. Nancy turned and rushed toward the house. William gave her a long look. 3 days later, Nancy went to the hospital again. Aunt Kathy brought some honey and a piece of homemade cheese. Say hello to Vanessa. Let her get well, don't spoil herself. Okay, Aunt Kathy, I will. Nancy pushed open the door to the room and froze at her mother's bedside as Peter sat gently spoon-feeding her. Hello. He glanced at her briefly, nodded, and continued to feed the woman. Nancy walked over and laid out on the table everything she had brought. So how are you guys doing here? Aunt Vanessa smiled. It didn't come out very well, though you could tell she was smiling. Kathy sent you a reply and said she was correcting you. More like a nod. Peter left the room. Nancy sat for a while and then scrambled out as well. She saw him at once, came over. Thank you, Nancy, for Mom saved Grandpa wouldn't, but Mom did. Peter, Grandpa couldn't have been saved. Believe me, you didn't try, you just left. See how you don't understand. How can I explain it to you? Even if they had taken him to the hospital, he still wouldn't have recovered. And I don't want to hear anything. Peter, Nancy, and I took 2 days off. I'm leaving again tomorrow, and I won't be back for a long time. Peter, what's it got to do with me? But I love you. Peter grinned wickedly. Well, you'll love someone else. It's the truth. Peter is family. And I'm leaving tomorrow, and I don't care what you're telling me right now. I don't believe you, and I honestly don't want to. Peter got up and went to the hospital. Peter, stop. He didn't turn around. She drove home, and not a single tear came out of her eyes. She got off the bus, walked to the house, and there was someone sitting on the bench at the gate. Nancy sighed. It was William, and apparently his mom. Well, apparently it was her fate that Nancy put a smile on her lips. William rushed towards her. Nancy, you forgive us, but you never have time. Nancy held out her hand in response. Nancy, come on in. As they walked through the yard. When they entered the house, Camille gasped. How big was this place in the city? Not everyone has one. Nancy turned with a smile, so there's not much room to swing in the city. There's small apartments. You're right. Nancy, what is there in the city if you can live as a human being in the countryside? Nancy threw off her jacket and began to set the table. She was in the mood to rip it off and throw it away. And then she remembered that one of the patients had brought her a beautiful bottle, saying that relatives had brought it from the south. She remembered how relaxing it was and quickly found it. Put it in the middle of the open table, looked at them, who were all looking at the house. Let's get to the table. Hungry everyone. The woman looked around. Oh, so many things to eat. Don't be shy. What's this? This is cognac from the south. I've never tasted cognac. For almost an hour, they talked about nothing, about the weather, about nature, about potatoes not being born. Then Camille, when apparently the cognac had done its work, spoke on the right subject. You on the walls, you realize that you are no longer young for the village and generally considered an old diva. As it happens, her William mine was almost 30 years old. Camille banged her fist on the table. William jumped up. Mom kept her voice down. Nancy watched the woman with interest. William just didn't know where to put himself. And Camille continued, you should be alone. Especially since my William has fallen head over heels in love with you. And you're a girl with blood and milk, with a respectable job, a house and a farm. There's a lot of independent women like you nowadays. Anyway, you should get married. She said it like she was making a point. William sat there red as a crab. She poured the walls for everyone and said, well, if we must, we'll get married. Camille took a swig and immediately wanted one. She and William carried her over to the couch. Vali kept apologizing. Nancy, I'm sorry, Mommy doesn't drink at all, just pour. Just a teaspoon before bedtime. I don't know what came over her. It's okay, let her rest. You can't drive. You can't make her drive so many kilometers at night. I wasn't thinking. Varia gave her a confused look. Nancy, what did you say about getting married? That's what I said. You want to marry me, don't you? Very much. Tell me honestly, is it for the house or not? No, Nancy, It's Mom who's always looking for an advantage. That's all. So she's starting to get ready for the wedding. Nancy S. threw the dishes in the sink. I stood there, thought about it, and decided it would help in the morning. What are you standing there for? Let's go where? What do you mean? Where to sleep? Just like that. Well, you can wait till the wedding if you want. She went to her room and William, as if he'd realized it, ran after her. In fact, Nancy realized that she was doing it because of the resentment she felt toward Peter. But she said to herself, it's all right, or so Peter told me quickly. Soon William showed up. Of course, even with his eyes closed, it was clear that it wasn't Peter. Valley turned away and drank, and she lay staring at the ceiling. The tears quietly flowed and flowed. In the morning, Nancy got up before everyone else. She quietly changed her mind. Dishes ready, put them away when she got dressed. Camille woke up as well. Oh, Nancy, how come I slept through everything? Where are you going? To work for breakfast. How are you getting home? Well, drop my keys off at the nurse's station. Well, whether it was on purpose or just a coincidence. But Camille showed up at the nurse's station just as it was getting crowded. Camille was sick. One of the old ladies came up to meet her, but you'd say she was sick. She brought the house keys to her future daughter-in-law. What daughter-in-law? Well, to which Nancy knows. You're lying, so our Nancy can marry your William. Why should I lie? You don't believe me? And the keys to his secret Camille went to the door of the study. Opened it on the wall, took the keys. I checked everything, turned everything off. Okay, Camille, thank you. The old woman closed the door and looked at everyone in the room. What's eaten and what's interesting about it? My William is so bad, he's not fit to be Nancy's husband. The same old woman laughed. No, why not bad? Not bad only or not very bad. But neither is your whole family. And Camille Evil flashed his eyes and headed for the exit at the door and stopped. He who laughs last laughs well and left. The old ladies whispered for a long time. One of them summed it up. Well, if you are 28 to 29 years old, you will marry a goat. The old ladies nodded, but still some feeling that everything was wrong did not leave them. Almost a month passed. William visited her often, but not as often as her future mother-in-law. You could say she moved in with Nancy completely. Sometimes she could cook dinner, but more often she just relaxed and almost never did the dishes. Nancy didn't pay any attention to that. She paid no attention to anything at all because she had other things on her mind right now, not happy thoughts at all. The fact was that Nancy was pregnant. She herself had only found this out a few days ago after doing some calculations. Nancy realized that the father was definitely not William. She breathed a sigh of relief. To be honest, she didn't want children with William just yet. But she immediately grabbed her head. What was she going to do now? The wedding was in 2 weeks, a wedding to William. A baby inside her with Peter. Nancy didn't know what to do. Didn't really want to be a single mother. Sure, it wasn't exactly ancient times now, but the baby would still have a hard time. If she canceled the wedding in the hope that Peter would come and recognize her child later, she could be embarrassed. Nancy lay awake for several nights and then decided to tell William everything. She couldn't lie to him like that. He's not lazy, but he's still human. We didn't get to talk until just before the wedding. Camille kept close to them, living according to the principle that where they were, there she was. And I was always trying to teach them something. William doesn't need to talk to you. Let's talk. He came home from work and lay in front of the TV. A very serious conversation. William turned off the TV, sat on the couch. Is something wrong? Yes, Nancy sighed. You see, before you, I dated a guy. So we broke up. Then you got married, things got crazy. A few days ago, William got tense. What? That he's back? No, it's worse. I don't see how it could be worse. Worse for you. Anyway, William, I'm pregnant. Not with you. But I'm not terminating the pregnancy. Nancy blurted it all out in one breath and winced at how relieved she felt. William was silent. She opened her eyes. He sat silent, arms lowered listlessly. What's it like now? I don't know, William. I've told you everything. It's up to you. She left the room and then heard the front door slam. Apparently William had left. Nancy sighed. Well, if he decided to call off the wedding, so be it. Only something told her he wouldn't cancel anything. William came the next day. Nancy, my mom, and I talked it over. Consulted who? Nancy thought she was going to faint at that confession. Mom, of course. You didn't want to lie to her, did you? No, but I thought it was our business for now. No, it's not. I mean, she'll think it's you. But well, that it'll be her own grandchild. Nancy sighed. Maybe he was right, but it was kind of gross, like getting dirty. So what did you and Mom decide? We decided you gave us no choice. Did that sound like that again? Not really, but Nancy just didn't know what to say. Nancy, let's just not talk about it, that's all. We don't know what's ahead of us. William, what do you mean? No, it's just that life is very unpredictable. It seemed like everything had been decided, but Nancy didn't feel very good about the conversation. They decided not to have a big wedding. Camille supported them in what? And rightly so, there's no money to waste. Better to buy something. Nancy grinned. Money, considering that it was mostly Nancy who was spending money on the wedding, was funny to hear. Of course, this was not at all how Nancy had envisioned the day from the wedding. It left the impression that they were just paying tribute to tradition. Nancy went back to work and William took a vacation. He said that first of all, he was tired, and secondly, they were obliged to give time off after the wedding. Nancy was already realizing that she was not going to break her leg very much. When the pregnancy was 3 months old, Nancy began to agonize. Yes, so much that just her soul was turned inside out. Whatever she did, whatever she took, she was throwing up all the time. She had already pulled out all her textbooks, but she couldn't find anything. She knew it was common. Something she didn't like. Please, I'm going into town tomorrow for 2 days. He's away from the TV. Why do you need all these tests? To get registered. Okay, sure. He went back to watching TV. Nancy sighed that she was alone before she got married and after. That you can't get yourself registered. Nancy laughed. Come on, Camille. You can't do that. You could even be punished for it. It used to be so much easier. You got pregnant, had a baby, and that was it. And now a bunch of tests for all sorts of nonsense only harm the baby. Nancy went back to her room with a smile. It was nice that at least someone cared about the baby. Of course, you can't make Valia love someone else's child. But at least sometimes you can ask about her well-being. In 2 days, the nausea was almost completely gone. Nancy didn't understand anything. The doctor spread his hands. Look for a problem at home. Maybe food. Maybe country milk. You see, we can try to find the cause of what's making you so nauseous. But we'll only know that when you've had the baby. Nancy, and I knew it all too well myself, but try to ride to the city all the time is not good either. I just decided to be patient. That time would pass, and the nausea would pass. But I still decided to diet. Not to eat anything at all. What could it be? She came home. Her mother-in-law asked her what her tests were, what was normal, what wasn't normal. Only then did she let her rest. Nancy first wanted to go to her room, but then she decided to lie down on the veranda. It's a little cooler there, plus the air is fresh. She was already starting to fall asleep. She heard William and his mother come into the kitchen. The mother was reading to William. Nancy was about to pull the pillow over her ears when she realized the conversation was about her. William, you didn't bring any wheat again. Mom didn't have time. Well, really, there's a whole wagon load of work to do. But get to work. Of course, it's more important. Did you hear that creep is back? What geezer? What Peter? The one your Nancy was having an affair with. William was quiet for a while. How do you know who she was having an affair with? You're the only one who doesn't know. Everyone else knows. So she came back. So what? Nancy's married now. Oh, but God gave her a fool of a son. You want me to tell you what could happen? Well, tell me this. Nancy could physically feel her breathing getting heavier. Peter's back. It was a nightmare, but she barely breathed. And she knew there was a reason her mother had brought William into the kitchen. Her room was very far away, which meant that what they were talking about was not for Nancy to know. And then there was the grass. What kind of weed? Nancy, maybe with honesty. She told you she wasn't pregnant by you. Any other woman would have just kept her mouth shut, and you'd be raising someone else's child. But she's going to tell you because he's about to have a kid. Who knows how he'll behave, but it's obviously not going to do us any good. Option 1, he'll tell Nancy that since they share a child, they should be together. The second one is he'll tell her to fuck off. Then when the baby's born, he'll start making demands. Yeah, money grubbing. See, for some reason, Mom thought she'd tell him something. And then for some reason she thought it was going to be that bad. Because, son, I've lived. I also really don't want to go back to our house. Back to your meager paycheck and the basins in the rain. I don't know where you're going with this. Am I supposed to walk next to Nancy so she doesn't, God forbid, talk to him? You don't have to walk next to her. Just get your ass up and go get some weed. If you give her a little more, she won't just be nauseous anymore. Everything should be fine. Then if we don't abort, we'll be rid of this baby in a couple or 3 weeks. And no one and nothing, son, will stop us from enjoying life. Nancy procured the edge of a pillow to keep from screaming at what she had just heard. Her mother-in-law is poisoning her baby. What should she do now? Run to the neighborhood police officer? And how will Nancy prove all this? She's got no one to stand up for her. Something told Nancy that if she went out there and told them to get lost, no one would leave. What would happen to her was not so clear. She heard a truck pull away from the house. That means William went to get weed. She's got to get to the people, and then we'll see what happens. She slipped quietly out of the porch and walked briskly toward Peter's house. She didn't understand why. Though, of course, she realized that if anyone could protect her, it was him. But everything would have to be told. Everything absolutely. She yanked open the wicket, peeked out. No one seemed to notice her. Took a breath. Who are we hiding from? Nancy shuddered. It was a voice she would have recognized from 1,000. Peter, hello. I need to talk to you. My husband doesn't scold. And Nancy couldn't hold back any longer. At first, she just cried. And then she got really hysterical. Peter was looking at her terrified. Nancy, do you have him? That he's hitting you. I'm gonna beat the hell out of him. No, he doesn't. Then what? Let's go in the house. He took Nancy under his arm and quickly led her home. Aunt Vanessa gasped, Nancy, baby, what's the matter with you? Hold on, I'll get you some water. While Nancy sang loudly, banging her teeth against the edge, Peter and his mother and watched her intently. Nancy set the glass down, calmed down a little, sighed. There's something I need to tell you. Peter sat down on the chair in front of her. Go on then. I don't think the story will be too interesting. But go ahead. Nancy missed the moment when Peter put his mask back on. I don't care. Let him act however he wants to act. It'll only help. She sighed again. I'm pregnant. Peter smirked. That's very valuable information. Nancy sighed again. Not from my husband. It's from you, isn't it? He stood up, then sat down. Nancy, why would you do that? If you weren't married. But why would you lie now? And I'm not lying. But I didn't come here to tell you about the pregnancy. Right before the wedding, I told William that I was expecting a baby and that it wasn't his. He and my mom were deciding what to do, but they decided to let it be. I calmed down, relaxed, and decided that never in your life will you ever know you're having a baby. Peter clenched his fists but remained silent. Aunt Vanessa moved closer to her and stroked her arm. Don't worry. Tell me. Nancy somehow felt calmer, and she went on talking. After Nancy had finished her story, Vanessa said that her grandmother in Nice was a pain in the ass. Apparently, he only got it from her. After all, they want to destroy a living soul. Peter didn't get up from his mom. Not just a living soul. They want to ruin my child. Nancy raised his head. Peter, I don't want anything from you. I won't ask you for anything. Just help. And I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just afraid to go home. But we'll talk about what happens next later. Right now, we have other things to think about. This is a very delicate situation. As you can imagine, it's no big deal. Especially since the tests didn't show anything. There's no way to prove it. What's most important now? Vanessa's up. The most important thing is not to jeopardize the lives of the baby and Nancy. We need to save all these proceedings for later. That's also true. But we can't let them go unpunished either. You realize what they're doing is a real crime. I do realize that, but I'm not letting Nancy go in there. Mom, wait. Would you call James? Vanessa blushed. James had only recently come to their village. He had been in the militia, and when he retired, he had bought a house and left the city apartment to his son, who, by the way, also continued his work. Vanessa and James began a friendship and then a romance. They kept it a secret. James didn't understand why, though. Why do I have to go call him? Go get him. He's your neighbor, too. Mom, please go. He'll understand you quicker. Vanessa, I wanted to say something else, but I changed my mind and ran out the door. Peter moved closer to Nancy, took her lessons in his. Nancy, you hear me? Don't be afraid. Nobody's gonna hurt your baby. Nancy, even though I was very upset, I noted that Peter said yours, not ours. So be it. She doesn't care. The important thing is that no one threatens her baby. Nancy was sure she was going to have a daughter. 15 minutes later, Vanessa returned. She was accompanied by a distinguished-looking man. The girl had to tell the story again. There you go. I thought this couldn't happen in the village. So it's for the house, for the money. That's what they can do. The way I see it, it's not really about the baby. It's the house that's at stake. These guys are all over it. Is that what it is? Grass, you say. It's really not that hard to find out what she's getting. It's just that you need credentials. You sit here, I'll go get my son. Peter's up too. But how? We don't know anything from what Nancy says. James smiled. A good bloodhound. Everything will find weed, and it will leave its mark either in the car or at home or in that old house. He turned to Nancy. You better lie down, run, or better yet, sleep. All this won't be soon. And you need to rest. And don't go outside, all of you. God forbid they suspect anything, and that's it. We'll never find anything. Nancy lay down on Peter's bed with pleasure. Everything here in the room smelled, and they were so pleasantly exciting. Peter peeked in on her a couple times, but Nancy was sweetly asleep. It was as if she had stopped worrying. Realized that she was treated very differently in this house. It was voices that woke her up, and then a light flashed in the room. Peter stood on the threshold and smiled. Well, you get up to bed. You need to testify. They've already taken your relatives. Nancy sat up abruptly. How? Just like that. William came home. Mother's waiting. She says you're missing. So they went looking for you. They've got the whole place surrounded. They forgot all about what they left in the car. James says that wood only looks safe, but in the right hands it could be poison. Nancy, just bear with me. Answer all the questions. Okay, Peter. Is there anything else to eat? I'm eating out of my mind right now. I haven't eaten since this morning. He looked at her, then he laughed. Well, sure, we'll feed you. You have. 15 minutes later, Nancy was gnawing on a large tea sandwich and answering questions. She had so far refused to eat more serious food just so as not to embarrass the uniformed people, but she was already imagining how she would return the plate of soup that Vanessa was now sorting out. She went over everything one more time, answered a few questions, and the policeman left. After a hearty dinner, she felt sleepy again. I should probably go home. Now that I'm not nauseous, I'm hungry all the time, eating and sleeping. Vanessa laughed. That's normal, kiddo. You eat and sleep with us tonight. You can go home tomorrow. Peter nodded. You know, I'd love to crash on his bed again. Let her sleep wherever she wants. If there's nowhere else, she can move just to sleep without disturbing him. Peter did come to her, lay down in his clothes, put his arms around her, and they fell asleep. How good it felt in his arms. She couldn't even think. How because she just fell asleep. Woke up in the morning, he was gone. She goes into the room. There's a distraught Vanessa sitting at the table. Where did Peter go? He's gone like a tumbleweed again, honestly. He left like that, but he left a note like that. He wrote it. I need to find out about myself, whether he's so attracted to his job, romance, and all that, or he's just a born fool. Nancy sank helplessly into a chair. She decided the night before that everything was going to be different. Peter again. The girl stood up. I'm going to go, Aunt Vanessa. I have to go to work soon. Are you feeling all right? Nancy smiled very well, didn't she? Here, take this with you to work. I baked buns and cutlets. Oh, you don't have to, I do. And remember, if my son is a fool. Do you have it? I got it, and I'm not leaving you. Nancy smiled sadly and walked out of the house. Vanessa escorted her out with a look. God, poor girl, she had been through so much. The time passed very quickly. Nancy had only been called to the police once, and then Vanessa and James had gone to court with her. In general, lately she had the impression that she had new parents, that Vanessa and her James were just a kite over her and fed her, constantly tried to see her off and invite her to visit. Nancy didn't resist. She was very much pleased. She had not heard from Peter, and she had given up waiting. She had enough to do. At the trial she felt sick when William and his mother began to yell at each other in public, and at her too. The girl's eyes went blurry. It was a long time ago. The trial ended without her. She called an ambulance in advance. As soon as the very first contractions began, I knew that as long as they would get there, and also the first labor. They brought her to a room with 2 other women. There was still time, and even though the environment and stomach pains were not conducive to conversation, they got to know each other. One woman came for her 3rd child and the other, like Nancy, for her 1st. The labor had gone well. An exhausted Nancy threw herself on the couch. The doctor said, "No, look, you're all from the same room. All the girls here still have a princess." Nancy smiled. She fell into a dream. Thought her princess would be the princess herself. The first one to be discharged was the one who was having her 3rd child. But girls, happily, I've had enough, and I wish you at least one more visit. Nancy laughed. Oh, let's get away from this rosebud for a while. Vanessa called at the maternity hospital. Every day she had come twice already. She was so excited that Nancy almost cried. Well, my princess, home tomorrow. The baby wrinkled her nose and Nancy laughed. Vanessa and James will be coming to pick her up tomorrow. The weather in the morning was as if it had heard that the happy mommy was being discharged from the maternity hospital. It had been pouring rain for 10 days at least. It's sunny this morning. Look at the weather. She was packing. Nancy came to pick you up. She smiled, turned to her neighbor. That's it. Bye. Have a nice day. You hugged her, and you too. Your Peter will definitely come to his senses. Yesterday before they were discharged, lying in the dark, they had a heart-to-heart. Nancy told her roommate's story. It turns out that her man, as soon as he found out about the pregnancy, fled in an unknown direction. How are you? Oh, Nancy, I'm fine. Mom and Dad turned out to be the best. They won't leave me. I used to hurt them so much before. The nurse took the baby away and Nancy gave her neighbor another big hug and kiss. Be sure to come and visit me. The baby needs fresh air. I have a huge house, so take your parents too. She followed the nurse to the exit. It wouldn't be long before she was finally home. The doors opened and Nancy froze. Standing right in front of her was Peter. He was in a suit. She had never seen him in such parade before, so she hardly recognized the nurse, carried her daughter out, and Peter rushed to her. She asked sternly, "You, Daddy?" He nodded in confusion. "I'm a nurse," she smiled broadly. "But you take your beauty." Peter gingerly took the pouch, peeked inside and looked at Nancy. She's so tiny. Nancy, I wanted to kill him. The mood was gone. What are you doing here? What's what? I'm picking you and your daughter up from the hospital. You didn't have to. We did fine on our own. In case you need to leave in a hurry, like you always do. Nancy looked at him angry and Peter looked at her confused. Nancy, I'm sorry, I'm not going anywhere. I don't believe you. She took her daughter from his arms and went down the stairs. Peter stood there for a while. Then he rushed after her. He overtook her, stopped. Nancy, forgive me, you fool. Marry me. Nancy stopped. Did she feel like screaming? Yes, I do. But she restrained herself. I'll think about it. James and Vanessa hurried from the car to them. Nancy, Vanessa's daughter, hugged her, and Nancy burst into tears. Daughter, how long had it been since she had heard someone call her that? They all got into the car, Peter behind the wheel. When the car started, Nancy noticed how carefully he drove around all the potholes, how he drove as if he were carrying Crystal. She smiled a little, and Vanessa leaned over to her ear and whispered right to Nancy, "And even though that knucklehead is my only and favorite son, you need to let him know how wrong he is," and sat down again as straight as anything. Nancy laughed softly. It seemed she had been very lucky to have a mother-in-law this time. One could only dream of such a one. This time the wedding was exactly what Nancy had always dreamed of: a lavish dress, a sea of guests that filled her big house, gifts, wine, and shouts of bitter. She agreed to marry Peter. After 3 months, he gave the whole one eyes and noses left. Every day after work he went to her, bought up in the store all the toys that were there. Nancy only grabbed his head. When he came joyful with a big coloring book, he showed it to Helen and said, "Oh, you'll grow up a little, and you and I will draw here." Peter, this and the books will still be lying around for at least 3 years. He looked at her perplexed. "Well, at least we'll already have it, and we'll buy another one later." She then sighed, "Well, what am I going to do with you? You'll buy a house full." "Nonsense. I'll have to look after you." "Nancy, is it?" "Yes." He picked her up in his arms, spun her around, shouted something, then set her down and said, "You'll be the happiest woman ever. I promise you that."
Subscribe and click the bell.
Adriana was married to Michael. For 5 years, they had lived in a private home with Michael's parents and had made a separate entrance in one half of the house. Adriana had a daughter from her first marriage. The girl studied at a technical school in another city and came to her mother on weekends. In a joint marriage, Adriana gave Michael a daughter, and now they were expecting a son. The couple would have been quite happy if not for the mother-in-law. She drove her daughter-in-law out of the light, and if not directly in the face, did not say nasty things, then looked unkindly. And she was always unhappy with everything. What Adriana would not make everything bad. The daughter-in-law tried to meet her as little as possible, but when you live near her, it is quite difficult to do so. Adriana went out into the yard where she had flowers growing. She had planted them herself, watered them, tended them. The flower was very beautiful along the edge of roses, fragrant, white, and in the center of the bright balls were bushes of white, yellow, and burgundy dwarf chrysanthemums, completed the composition, and in the fall flowers. Indian summer, Adriana also had bushes of peonies. A bed with tulips all required care and watering. Adriana loved messing around with the plants and the soil. It was as if she felt they were saying something. Now the chrysanthemums are thirsty. They need watering. Her husband made fun of her for it. So Adriana preferred not to let him in on her conversations with the flowers. She listened and got an answer. She did what she thought the flowers wanted her to do. Michael worked as a truck driver. He often had long trips. From his business trips, he brought his girls many different gifts and sweets. The eldest called him Daddy and always obeyed him. Today, Michael had to return from another business trip. It lasted more than 2 weeks. During this time, the eldest daughter almost passed the session at the technical school. The youngest had lost 2 teeth. The baby in Adriana's belly began to move, and the chrysanthemums in the flower loomed. Adriana made 2 trips to the antenatal clinic and had an ultrasound. The doctor confirmed that she was having a boy. However, Michael and Adriana were sure of this even before all the tests and ultrasounds. The genetic analysis was good. Adriana was scared to death of all kinds of abnormalities and syndromes. Her friend had a daughter born with Down syndrome, not burdened with pathology. So the child was without any other abnormalities, but one syndrome was enough with a head. The girl at the age of 5 did not speak only separate syllables, but was very affectionate and madly loved to sing and dance. A friend was constantly engaged with her, went to different rehabilitation centers. But the development was very slow. The doctors insisted on me, Daisy, and Adriana reluctantly agreed. I was afraid that a long needle would damage the dense eggs, but everything went well. and the result of the analysis was also good. Mother-in-law went out into the yard. Remove your flower from here. I will plant potatoes in this place. It's September. What potato planting? Adriana asked. 6 months will pass quickly, so that by spring there will be nothing. Do you hear? Adriana answered her nothing and went into the house. Michael's parents' house was old and dark. It smelled like a net. Their part of Michael Adriana had renovated with their own hands, and it was the complete opposite of bright and clean. They'd insulated the walls, made a separate entrance from the street. Michael knew his parents, their tolerable character. They only accepted their granddaughters normally. Adriana was disliked in every possible way. And from the moment she arrived at the house, Michael brought Adriana with Betty and introduced her to his parents. Mom, this is my wife Adriana, her daughter Betty. We'll be living with you until we get our own place built. Hopefully that will be soon. Son, you see we don't have much room. And you brought a girl with a tail. She's not a girl, she's my wife. And I'm gonna ask you to treat her with respect. You don't have to love her, but as my wife, yes. Michael's voice has a metallic tone to it. Come on, we're not gonna hurt your precious wife. Calm down. Come on, live. The mother-in-law shook her lips unhappily. A year later, Betty was born. Her mother-in-law was very fond of her, taking care of her. Adriana thought she'd start treating her better. But no, it was as if her mother-in-law either didn't notice or constantly made remarks. Picked on the child. Looking the wrong way. Milk low fat. Milk high fat. Milk high fat. Milk low fat. Adriana tried to ask why she disliked her. The mother-in-law was silent at first, and then she said, "Why should I love you? I dreamed that my son married a girl, that all the children would be common. But he married a woman with a child. So he'll raise someone else's child. So what's your problem with Betty? She lives in the dormitory. She's rarely here. When she graduates, she'll get a job. Do her part. Where's her father? Does he even pay child support? He does, but it's a pittance. He takes jobs like this on purpose. It looks like they pay, but it's a pittance. Why did you get divorced? He started drinking and raising his hand against me, so he had a reason to. A good wife's husband wouldn't drink. You've got him and my Michael down, you see. Why did you do that? I tried to keep our family together, but he drank before me. And now he's gone off the rails. I said everything. My mother-in-law turned her back and walked out. Adriana closed the door to her room and burst into tears. So much time she tried to melt the icy heart of this woman. But it was all in vain. Nothing worked on her mother-in-law. Adriana felt something aching in her chest. She was very upset. She wanted so much to be loved and accepted by her husband's family. What else she needed to do to make that happen, she had no idea. Adriana had been an obedient girl all her childhood. Didn't Mom and Dad get upset? She loved to draw and make various crafts. She could spend hours watching butterflies and goats. In the fall, she would collect leaves and listen to them. When Adriana was 5 years old, her mother died of cancer. Since then, the girl as a substitute began to be rude to elders, to do everything out of spite. But she was only expressing her strong emotions. She didn't know any other way. Her father punished her for it, and once even hit her. And then Adriana realized that no one would ever love her again, and she withdrew into herself. After a while, her father brought her stepmother into the house. She already had a little girl of her own. Adriana was 8 years old then, and the stepmother's daughter was 2 years old. The little girl received all the love, and Adriana as if not noticed. Everything beautiful and new to little Adriana. But things from the neighbor kids were given to her. Toys were never given to her. And when she tried to play with her stepsister's dolls, she was yelled at for taking away her toys. Adriana learned to read early. She read a lot and a variety of literature. She especially liked historical novels. She imagined herself their heroine, put on fancy dresses, rode in gilded carriages drawn by water horses, danced at balls, and fell in love with princes. In these stories, Adriana was loved. She was admired. Poems were dedicated to her. When she had done her homework, she would take the next book brought from the library and read into the night. The librarians noticed the active young reader and kept new and interesting books especially for her. Adriana had good taste and a musical ear. At school, she loved singing lessons, sang along to the radio, liked to watch song contests, and kept her own songbook where she wrote down the lyrics of her favorite songs. After school, Adriana tried to enter the University of Economics at the Faculty of Goods Introduction. But she did not have enough passing scores. She had to take the documents and take them to the technical school for an accountant. There, Adriana was accepted. She was looking forward to the moment when she could go to the dormitory. Summer passed quickly, and now her father loaded the girls' belongings into the car and brought Adriana to the technical school. He took a bag out of the trunk. He said goodbye, got into the car, and drove away. A new life awaited her. She liked it at the technical school, and it was not very difficult to study. Soon, Adriana started to receive an increased scholarship. She spent it mainly on books, paper, and pencils with colors. At once, she became an active reader of the library of the technical school. The girls from the group were not particularly eager to communicate with those who lived in the dormitory. They considered themselves better dormitory because they themselves are urban. Therefore, those who lived in the dormitory created their own social circle. Adriana of all socialized only with Kathy from a dysfunctional family. Kathy's mother and father drank and paid no attention to the children. Kathy was not moderately developed, smoked, liked to drink beer and go out with boys from the neighboring technical school. The girls lived in the same room. Adriana liked that Kathy was simple and easy to communicate with. That's why she had a lot of friends and acquaintances. She could find contact with anyone. One day, two young men from the Radio Communications College appeared in their company. Ethan and Benjamin, as they called themselves, were already graduates. The guys invited the girls to the movies, walked around town with them, bought treats, bought beer and cigarettes, Adriana lemonade and candy. Adriana didn't like the taste, the beer and cigarettes. She never learned to smoke, although Kathy showed her how to inhale smoke. Ethan immediately turned his attention to Adriana, a tall, dark-haired girl with brown eyes and a charming smile. She was immediately attracted by her bright appearance. Adriana was not a talker, but Ethan even liked it. He could talk for hours about something interesting. Adriana just listened. She was a good listener. She asked questions. If she didn't understand, she would ask what she was interested in. That's how they spent their time in the evenings, walking and talking. During the day, they both studied. Ethan was in his senior year. Adriana was finishing her third. There was only occasional time. They never quarreled in the evenings, and there seemed to be complete understanding between them. Adriana liked Ethan. She found it easy and pleasant to spend time with him. Gradually, a slight infatuation turned into a crush. Ethan and Adriana began to meet more often. They stood outside the girls' dormitory for long periods of time. At the end of May, it was Kathy's birthday. Almost all the dorm mates had already left for the vacations. Adriana and Kathy had their last practical classes, and they had 2 days to study. Kathy approached Adriana. "I want to have my birthday party tonight. Are you coming with me? Are there a lot of people you want to invite?" "No, just Ethan and Benjamin." "How are you?" "We're going to have a grown-up party." "What's that?" "Well, we'll drink, we'll dance, and we won't get kicked out of the dorm." "No, I made a deal. Commandant Kelly bought champagne and candy. She's only gonna close her eyes for one night. So, you know what you need me to do for you. Can you help me set the place up? I bought cigarettes and champagne, sausage, cheese, loaf. There's butter and sprats in the fridge. You do the boutiques well, and I'll buy juice. Deal? Let's go. We're late for our date." In the evening, the girls set the table. The appetizer was not simple, but Adriana tried to put it on plates so that the whole table was filled, and it seemed that everything was a lot. The guys arrived on time, took a box of chocolates and 4 bottles of champagne out of a bag. Kathy was handed a cosmetic kit of creams. Wow, that's enough bottles for a whole wedding. Kathy was thrilled. And the cosmetics are great. I've been wanting to get one of these for a long time, but was constantly out of money. We spent a long time choosing and consulting with the saleswoman. She recommended this set to take here in day and night cream, and for hands, and for feet, and around the eyes. In general, all you can take, and you will be a superstar. Great. Kathy jumped up and poked the guys in turn on the cheek. Let's get to the table. It's my birthday after all. Ethan opened the champagne silently and poured it into mugs. I wanted to buy glasses, but they won't last long. I can't count how many of them have been used up. Come on, it's fine from the mugs. Benjamin lifted the mug. Happy birthday to you, Kathy. Be well and happy. Everyone raised their mugs and the check. The champagne hit Adriana on the nose, and she rarely drank it before. On New Year's Eve, she'd only had 1 sip and couldn't drink any more. It wouldn't go down. But today, surprisingly, she drank a whole mug. At once she felt cheerful and light. She wanted to sing, dance, and hug everyone. They poured everyone a second mug. Let me make a toast. Adriana stood up. Table, be ever so cheerful. You're like a sister to me. Adriana smiled at Kathy, walked over and hugged her. Thanks, Carlo. You're great too. The evening flew by quickly. The young people exchanged barbs and jokes. Kathy got up and turned on the tape recorder. A tune came on. It was a slow, very beautiful composition. Kathy walked over to Benjamin and pulled him to the center of the room. They embraced and began to dance. Kathy put her hands on Benjamin's shoulders and kissed him. He didn't pull away. So they danced and kissed. Ethan looked at Adriana. Let's go and dance. Do you mind? I don't mind. Come on. They joined the dancers. Ethan hugged Adriana tightly. She liked the music, liked Ethan, liked the evening itself. She rested her head on Ethan's shoulder, swaying to the beat of the music with him. She wished the evening would never end. But everything has its limits and its time limit. The music ended. Kathy dragged Benjamin out to the balcony to smoke. Ethan lowered himself onto the bed and placed Adriana on his lap. He put one arm around her waist and the other around her shoulders. He stared intently into her eyes. Suddenly, Ethan pulled her to him so that his face was in front of hers. Ethan touched his lips to hers, and the world around her suddenly disappeared. It was just him and her and their evening. Her clothes slid off her shoulders and hips. Adriana was burning in Ethan's arms, hugging and kissing him as if this was the last day of their lives, and they would part forever. The door to the room opened briefly and closed immediately. Kathy jumped to her fist and dragged Benjamin for another walk for a couple hours. Ethan and Adriana lay naked side by side on the narrow bed. The moon was shining brightly through the room's window. Adriana was happy. It wasn't exactly how she had envisioned this moment of her adult life, of course. But what had happened did not bring guilt, rather a sense of fulfillment. Ethan stood up and began to get dressed, dressing awkwardly in front of his friends. Oh really, I'll be quick. Adriana really quickly got dressed, and the bed was shot. It was like nothing had ever happened here. Ethan poured himself and Adriana more champagne into a mug and raised his own. Here's to you, and to you, Adriana said. The door opened not much, then wider. Then Kathy's head appeared in the doorway. Are you all right? The newlyweds are fine. Are you coming in? Benjamin, come in. Kathy sat down at the table and opened the box of candy. Took one, took a bite, and put it back in the box. Delicious candy. I should try them with champagne. Kathy, happy birthday. Benjamin raised his mug and looked around at the crowd. I wish you happiness. Finish technical school well and get a good job. Benjamin, let me live. Work can wait. Kathy grumbled unhappily. Wish me a woman's happiness. I wish you a woman's happiness. Now that's good. Let's have a drink. Then Kathy asked Ethan and Adriana to go for a walk. They got up and, holding hands, went outside. The night was quiet and without windy. The moon shone brightly, illuminating everything around them. And after technical school, where will you work? Adriana turned her head and admired Ethan's profile. Ethan was tall, blue-eyed, brunette, was trim and shoulder clean. He had rowed in high school and played on the soccer team in tech school. I don't know yet. I think the chip factory is hiring our graduates. I don't know either. I'll be thinking about getting a job next year. That's right. A lot of things can change. Don't be in a hurry. Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. They walked slowly along the street. The bridge supports were fiddling ahead. Let's go and look at the river. We'll go at night. They came to the suspension footbridge, stopped near the fence, and looked into the distance. It was the longest footbridge, about 200 meters long, narrow, only 1.5 meters wide. Standing on it at night was a little creepy. It felt like flying into the water, but it was a vain fear. The construction of the bridge was strong and will stand for many years to come. On this bridge, it was customary for the lovers of the town to declare their love to each other. There was a moonlit path from the moon. The city seemed shrouded in mystery and mysticism. Adriana began to think that this man was her destiny. Naive. In the summer, all the students went home. Adriana and Kathy were no exception. Benjamin and Ethan also went to their parents' house. Before leaving, everyone exchanged phone numbers, promising to call. Adriana arrived at her father's house, and the usual routine began. She read books, went to the river to paint, collected berries and mushrooms in the forest, sewed outfits. Half-sister was already 13 years old, the teenage period. She dyed her hair green, wore one earring, and had a tattoo in the form of a cat on her shoulder. She was allowed everything, got away with everything. Adriana she treated with disdain. She took her room while she was studying, and Adriana had to live on a sofa in the kitchen. In mid-July, Adriana began to feel sick in the mornings. She lost her appetite and became dizzy. She put it all down to the greasy food her stepmother cooked. But the rest of the household was fine. She only became suspicious when her cycle didn't start on time. She waited another week. Nothing happened. Worry was building up. Adriana couldn't sit at home and rushed to the drugstore. She bought a test and tested it. The result was disappointing. Pregnant. The news was overwhelming and alarming. What to do? Adriana decided to call Ethan, dialed the number, and heard the dear voice. Hi. Hi. He's happy to hear from you. How are you doing? Not so good, to say the least. What's wrong? Ethan, I'm pregnant. Are you sure? It's a sure thing. What should I do? Bad timing, of course. No abortion. You'll have the baby. What will I tell my father? Nothing. Don't tell him yet. I'll come and we'll decide everything. Ethan arrived on the weekend and asked for Adriana's hand in marriage. Dad didn't understand the reason for the rush. Kids, what's the rush? Let's have a proper wedding. Wait a couple or 3 months. We don't want a big wedding. We want a normal college wedding. We'll organize it ourselves. We just have to get everyone together. All right, do as you see fit. Thanks, Dad. Adriana hugged her father. She really missed his love. But her father was busy with her stepmother and her sister Sonia, and there was always something going on, and she needed constant attention and adoration. Her stepmother had no love for her, and her father simply, unconditionally loved Sonia. At the end of August, Ethan and Adriana got married. Those friends who were able to attend were invited to the wedding. On Adriana's side were her father and stepmother, and on Ethan's side were his parents and older brother. The wedding was played in a local dining room. There was plenty of room, and the food was good. Ethan earned money for the wedding by repairing audio equipment. His parents added a little. Adriana's father paid for the dresses and rings. Adriana's witness was Kathy. Lena was the witness. They stuck together as a couple. Adriana could choose any wedding dress she wanted for now. Her belly was not yet visible, so she chose fitted, with open shoulders and a wide bodice skirt, beautifully dwarfed by lace and pearlized beads of different sizes. Instead of a veil, Adriana chose a pull in the form of a silver tree branch with rhinestones. White shoes, she bought the most ordinary ones. When she tried on the whole outfit, she looked magically tender and very beautiful in the mirror. May this outfit bring me happiness. Adriana made a wish. Young people were making noise and joking near the registry office. The young people were worried. Finally, it was their turn to go to the reception hall. Adriana, Ethan, Kathy, and Benjamin walked in front. All the other guests a little further back. The registrar's speech was short. She wished the newlyweds love and fidelity to each other and suggested that they exchange rings. Ethan put a ring on Adriana's finger, and she put a ring on his finger in return. The registrar congratulated the young couple and at the end of the ceremony invited them to seal the bond of marriage with their first family kiss. They kissed, and once again the world around them disappeared. Adriana's heart froze and her sense of time disappeared. She dissolved in Ethan and in her feeling for him. They only woke up when the guests started making noise. Did you guys break all the records? We were going to order pizza here to make the most of the time. Kathy laughed. Can you kiss? Everybody laughed. We walked to the cafeteria. It was not far from the registry office. Parents were already standing in front of the entrance to the canteen. They sprinkled grain on the newlyweds and wished them happiness. The wedding was fun and not without adventures. A couple of young people managed to fight, so they had to get a first aid kit and treat wounds. Adriana threw her bouquet high up. The bouquet was caught not by Kathy, but by another classmate, Lisa. Kathy took offense. So I'm not getting married. Yes, you will, said Benjamin. Not all at once. Take your time. You're a comforting man, aren't you, Benjamin? Kathy took him by the arm and said, you will be the most beautiful bride. I promise you. Benjamin squeezed Kathy's hand. The wedding lasted only one day. The next day, the young people gathered in the dormitory. They brought snacks and champagne and had a party. Commandant Kelly came to the light. She was immediately poured champagne in a mug. Tip of the hat to you, yes, love. Kelly's toast was short. We'll give you a private room as a gift from the administration. She drank the drink in one gulp, took a piece of sausage from her plate, and went to her room. Thank you. Ethan and Adriana barely had time to shout after her. The party continued into the morning. They found a guitar somewhere, sang songs, danced. The guests scattered to their rooms. Only in the morning Ethan and Adriana did not even undress from fatigue. They just collapsed on the bed, hugging each other. In the morning, the whole dorm was looking for Brian. Everyone had a headache from too much champagne and wine the night before. Some were swallowing aspirin. Others were brewing coffee. Ethan got up and went to the kitchen. 15 minutes later, he returned, carrying flavored coffee in a cup. The cup was very beautiful. Adriana, my wife. Wake up. Coffee in bed. My God, I feel like an aristocrat. I want it every day. What's with the cup? Did the neighbors borrow it? It's beautiful. You're prettier than any cup. Oh yeah, sleep at night with makeup on. I look like I fell out of a tree. Baba Yaga is now prettier than me. Adriana tried to laugh, but faltered. My head hurts. I'll bring champagne now. Being aristocrats is like that in everything. Ethan left. Adriana quickly took off her wedding dress, put on her regular clothes, grabbed a towel, and headed for the shower. Washed off all her makeup, had a good wash, barely tidied up her hair, and went back to the room. Ethan had already brought champagne and 2 glasses, but where would the glasses come from? Luda gave them to me in our miserable dorm. She says there's only 2 left, so she's giving them to us. Oh great, here's our first family dinnerware. We won't have these dishes for a long time. Ethan smiled. Glass has a way of twisting. I've made sure more than once. These won't stay beautiful for long. I'll have to stop by Kelly's to thank her. We'll go in together. We should get the keys to our room. I can't even imagine. My own room, Adriana replied. They ate a breakfast of sandwiches they'd made from leftover sausage and sliced bread and went down to Kelly's. Here came the newlyweds. How's your health? Morning. Thank you, I'm fine. Kelly, thank you for the glasses. They're beautiful. We were wondering when we'd get our room keys. I'll give them to you right now. What's the holdup? It's just that we need to do some repairs, paint the ceilings and floors and wallpaper. I can give you the paint, but you can buy the wallpaper yourself. Thanks, Kelly. Ethan took the keys, and he and Adriana went up to the 3rd floor to see the room. The room was bright, but in a bit of a state of disrepair. The wallpaper was hanging in pieces, the ceiling was yellowish in color, and there was the smell of smoke. Adriana was a little upset, but then decided that things would be much better after the renovations. They would freshen everything up, and the smell would disappear. And it did. Ethan invited Benjamin over, and Kathy volunteered to help paint the floor. Within a month, they had the room looking decent. The superintendent came in to see how well they'd done. Oh, well done. Now that's the way she does things. We did what we wanted. I wish you happiness in your new place. Adriana was due to give birth in February. Until then, she had to pass the session and apply for a sabbatical. Ethan was often late in the evening and came home drunk. Adriana didn't pay attention at first. She thought, well, they celebrate the session with friends to eat. But when he began to come between sessions under the fly, and she began to slowly resent, why are you drunk every night? Well, once, twice, but you almost every day come drunk. I want a sober husband by my side. Adriana's being picky. It's just the guys invited me. It was hard to say no. You should try it for a change. Time passed under the winter clothes. I could hardly see my stomach, but it was getting harder and harder to walk. It was a snowy winter. Adriana could hardly move on the street. Her gait resembled a duck's. On February 23, she set the table to celebrate the men's holiday. Ethan arrived late. She was about to fall asleep. On these winter days in the evenings, she wanted to go to bed early. Oh, the field is set. Happy feast. Sit down. You've had dinner. There's a present for you on the table. Thank you, I'm fine. Ethan didn't even look at the present. It's delicious. Why don't you eat it yourself? I don't want to, said the young wife. I'm going to lie down now. Sit with me for a while. I just made an order a while ago. The customer arrived. He asked me to come early. I'll sit a little, but not for long. I can't sit for long. My stomach is tight. It seems to me that the baby is inside, with all its arms and legs, and it's always pushing my head, or my arm is sticking out. Wow, you're taking it all in. I'd probably be dead by now. Nature designed women to be able to handle pregnancy and motherhood with ease. Otherwise, mankind would have died out long ago. Adriana laughed. And men are a relic of the past, an atavism. Ethan grinned, took a drink and exhaled. Soon, all but a few will be extinct. They'll be left to reproduce. You say for reproduction. 2. Will the women be lining up to serve them? Adriana frowned, then smiled. I imagined the picture. Yes, that's exactly what would happen. A few individuals to breed. Women in line. Ethan smiled contentedly. That was a good one. Yeah, you put everything in the fridge. I'm gonna go lay down and lie down. I'll eat a little more, then I'll put it away, the boy replied. Ethan sat there pouring himself a drink and a snack. He was kind of gloomy. Adriana put it down to his fatigue. Sleep came quickly, and she fell into it like a pit. In the dream, she was walking along the bank of a river, and a boat was floating on the river. In the boat sat Ethan, smiling but not looking at her. She shouted and waved at him, but he paid no attention to her. The boat disappeared around a bend in the river. Adriana stopped and suddenly felt her feet sinking into the sand. It was the sands of the future, and she sank deeper and deeper until she was up to her neck. She screamed and called for help, but no one answered or came. Suddenly, a man in camouflage, a stranger to her, ran down the hill. He saw what was going on, quickly oriented himself, found some sticks, put them down, lay down himself, and crawled up to Adriana and started pulling her by the hand. Then other people began to descend the mountain. Suddenly, a whole crowd formed around Adriana. She was pulled out and laid down on the grass. She was lying completely without Selena. At this point, Adriana woke up. Ethan was sleeping soundly next to her. She got up and went to get a drink of water. Her stomach was pulling and very hard. The child did not push. When she went to the wash basin, she felt something running down her legs, and she could not stop it. It was her water breaking. Ethan, get up. The water's breaking. What about the water? What do we do? An ambulance. Yeah, we should call an ambulance. I've already packed my bags. I just need to get changed myself. Ethan got up quickly, dressed, washed his face, turned to Adriana. How much time do we have? They explained to me in the course at the maternity hospital that there's 12 o'clock after the departure. That's when I'll make myself a quick coffee and I'm ready. Take your time. You can have breakfast. And I won't have anything, just water. Ethan went to the kitchen, made coffee, brought it to the room, and started to eat breakfast. It was undesirable to drink coffee, but even its smell was unpleasant for her. Now, during her pregnancy, her love was cream. She could drink 2 glasses at a time and still wanted more. And she also craved sweets, but she only allowed herself marshmallows, so she wouldn't gain too much weight. However, the extra 5 pounds were not growing. Adriana dressed one last time, looked over the things on top, put the exchange card in her purse, her passport, but she herself could not interfere with her stomach. Ethan finished his breakfast, began to dress. Then he walked over to Adriana, who was sitting down, and pulled on her low, soft suede boots without a lock. I helped her put on her down jacket, and she put on her hat. The cab was parked near the entrance. It had snowed all night, and there was a thin path leading away from the driveway. Ethan opened the car door, and Adriana struggled to get into the back seat. The driver had thoughtfully slid the front seat farther forward. They drove through the snowy city, and the snow continued to fall. The driver made sure to pull up to the front porch of the emergency room. Ethan got out and helped Adriana out. He took the bags from the driver and paid for them, holding Adriana under his arm. He opened the door and they went inside. There were already 3 couples sitting there. The woman had already changed into a robe and slippers. Adriana had taken off her coat. Ethan got the slippers and helped her take off her boots. She changed into her robe and was ready to be examined. The line moved fairly quickly. Soon, there was only 1 pair left in front of them. You'll take the coat and boots home. Let's put them in a bag. Here's a big one and a separate one for the boots. She took care of everything. Don't worry. Strangely enough, she was calm. The impending arrival of the baby didn't seem to bother her at all. But that was only outwardly. Inwardly, she was tense. Sanikova Adriana. The midwife called out to her. Adriana rose heavily and went into the office. There sat 2 medical workers, a midwife and a nurse. Adriana put the exchange card and passport on the table. They started filling out the documents. When all the data had been entered, the midwife invited her for an examination. During the examination, some more near-dense water came out. The midwife had been working in this maternity hospital since the day it opened, had delivered many babies, and now, based on her advanced age, she had been put on reception. Mani, you will give birth today. Savaliva took her to the delivery room. The midwife helped Adriana down from the chair, signed the bags. The nurse wrote papers with her name on them and put them in the bags on top, then took them and led Adriana to the elevator. They went up to the 3rd floor where the delivery room was. Lie down on the couch. They are coming to take a blood test. Adriana lay down. A woman in labor was lying on the next bunk, and moaned softly. There was no one else. The doctors came in. A heartbeat machine was brought up. The baby was recorded. A young nurse with a suitcase came running, quickly pulled out a test tube and landscape, pricked her fingers, took blood for analysis. The anesthesiologist came in and said that due to the wrong position of the baby, it was decided to have an emergency cesarean section. He began to fill out a questionnaire, asked about reactions to medications, the presence of diabetes mellitus, then told me how the anesthesia procedure would take place. He said that the operating room would be ready in an hour. Adriana lay on the couch, her whole life flashing before her eyes. The upcoming surgery was frightening. She had previously read cesarean section, wrote that the stitch hurts, it is hard to walk. How will she take care of the baby? But she's not the only one who's having this surgery. I mean, how do moms do it? She'll do it. They brought a sheer cape and a hat. Adriana changed and lay down on the gurney. The nurses wheeled her into the OR. From above, the ceiling was being moved. She couldn't orient herself where they were taking her. There were turns and doors, then turns again. And then they were in the operating room. A huge lamp lit up and shone in her eyes. Curtains were placed in front of Adriana so she couldn't see the surgical process, and in the stadium took Adriana by the hand and sat her down, gave her a shot in the spine and injected medicine. Then put a pulse on her finger, oxana a meter in a vein, put a catheter, and began to gradually inject the drug for us ultrasound from the fact that the fetus was pressing on the veins. Adriana was feeling dizzy. She really wanted the weight off of her. The drug started to take effect, and Adriana stopped feeling her lower body. How are you feeling? The anesthesiologist held her hand. You say she won't fall asleep with me. I'm fine, but the baby's pushing and I'm dizzy. You'll feel better soon. Now they're making the incision, taking out the baby and this little girl. The doctors cut the umbilical cord and lifted the baby high so that Adriana could see her daughter. A feeling of joy, gratitude, and emotion awoke in her. My daughter, now you will be treated and stitched up. After that, you will be taken to the intensive care unit where you will spend at least 6 o'clock for observation. You're going to be a little dizzy. That's normal when the anesthesia wears off. Ask the nurses for a blanket. The baby was brought in and put to the breast. Adriana felt tenderness for this little red lump of life. Then the baby was taken away to be examined. Adriana was taken to the intensive care unit. There were 4 other women in the room with her. All of them were also post-C-section. As the anesthesia began to wear off, Adriana felt very cold indeed. So much so that her teeth were chattering and she was shivering. Nurse, I'm cold, shouted Adriana. The nurse came with a blanket and covered her thoroughly. Your body may be itchy now. Do not scratch it under any circumstances. You'll be itchy later on. It's a side effect of the anesthesia. And indeed, when Adriana accidentally scratched her chin, her whole body immediately became itchy. She wanted to scratch everything with fierceness to take away the itch. But she what to eat. The force was held back. Her neighbors were experiencing the same thing and complaining. Adriana asked for the phone to inform Ethan, but he did not pick up. Then she wrote a message. She gave birth to a daughter. Weight so-and-so, height so-and-so. Everything went well. She got nothing in reply. Adriana was now unable to think about where Ethan was and what he was so busy doing that he couldn't answer. 6 o'clock passed, and the roommates began to be taken to their wards. They came for Adriana. Again, the ceiling floated overhead. Turns, doors, turns again. Rolled into the ward and put her next to the bed. Let's carefully climb over and onto the bed, one of the orderlies commanded. First one leg, then the other. Adriana tried to do so, but a sharp pain pierced her stomach. Biting her lip, she courageously and patiently moved her body onto the bed. The pain seemed to spread throughout her body. Everything was hurting already, and Adriana groaned. Now the nurse O would come in and inject herself with painkillers. Be patient, sweetheart. The orderly squeezed the plums, looked at her, She would have been glad to be with Adriana longer, but there were many women in labor, and each one demanded attention. The father called. "Adriana, what about your daughter? How did you have a baby?" "Daddy, the girl's name is Betty." "Congratulations. What good news. How are you doing?" "Not too bad. I had an emergency C-section after the surgery because the baby wasn't laying right. There was no other way. My daughter is recovering. The hospital will do whatever they need to do. Take care of yourself." "You take care of yourself too, Daddy." Adriana tried to turn on her side, but the pain was getting in the way. After struggling and grabbing the side of the bed, she finally turned around. A nurse came in and administered a painkiller. It became a little easier, and Adriana fell asleep. When she woke up, she saw that there was a plate with a strange liquid on the nightstand, and on the next bed there was a neighbor who had been brought in while Adriana was asleep. "I'm Miranda," said the girl and fixed her long dark hair. "I'm Adriana. And who was born to you?" "A boy." "I had a girl." "So you had an operation after me?" "Yes, you were wheeled out and I was wheeled in. My stomach hurts a lot." "And you?" "Oh, and the nurse told me that they're gonna be lifting us out in 12 o'clock. "Oh, only if it's a crane." Adriana laughed, but she didn't let the pain get the best of her. "We're definitely not going up without it." Miranda smiled. "I can't laugh. It hurts me too." "Is this your first child?" "Yes, we wanted a girl, and it was a boy. But it's good too, and we were just waiting for a baby." "I don't care who." "That's great. I've already bought a crib, and the sides for it, and the stroller is already there. We'll go for a walk. We just picked it out. My husband has to buy and put it together." "What's that on the nightstand?" "We're not supposed to eat after the anesthesia. I was told they'd bring a light meal. This must be it. She looks so appetizing to eat. Do you want some of this soup?" "No. I'm eating it. Will there be anything in my stomach?" The nurse came in and said she had to get up. Adriana got up first. She walked a short distance from the bed and came back up. She wasn't dizzy and her stomach felt empty and light. Adriana thought sadly that there was no one else inside pushing and disturbing her day and night. "Girls, in an hour we can go wash up." A cheerful red-haired nurse peeked into their room. "Oh, great. I'm sick and tired of this construction, afraid to turn around to avoid hitting it." And indeed, another nurse came in and freed them from the marking tubes and invited Miranda into the shower room first. She waited for her to get a towel and underwear and went with her. There she explained how to do everything and stood by to help in case she suddenly felt sick. Then it was Adriana's turn, and she was happy to go swimming. She loved it, but for now there was only a hygienic shower. She bought a special long patch to keep the stitching for the suture from getting wet. "Miranda, when do you think we will get the babies?" "I don't know." They said the next day. Just as she said that, the door swung open and the nurse drove off. Visa. One rolled up, and to the other Adriana. In them lay two tightly rolled packages. Following the orderly came with, and the red-headed nurse invited Miranda to learn how to undress and dress the baby. Miranda took the baby in her arms and walked over to the personalized table. "And you watch and learn." The nurse invited Adriana in. Miranda carefully unwrapped the baby. He was so tiny and fragile. With confident movements, the nurse showed the women how to hold the baby while diapering, how to put on and fasten the diaper. It all seemed simple to Adriana, but when it was her turn to crucify her daughter, she became terribly agitated. Her hands trembled as she took the defenseless body. She was afraid of hurting something. Having mastered her feelings, Adriana confidently took the girl, just as the nurse had said, and the soap sewed to pairs, put it on the table, then took out some pretty clothes from her bag and dressed the little girl. It was the turn of feeding. The nurse showed how to put to the breast. The women did what other women had done for centuries before them, feeding babies. It didn't go well the first time, or did they think so? The babies opened wide erotically and tried very hard to get milk. After an hour, both babies were taken away for procedures, and told they would bring them back in the evening. Adriana was pleased with herself, but her stomach was very sore. The painkillers helped, but not for long. She tried to sleep. It succeeded with great difficulty. As soon as she fell asleep, the doctor came in for his rounds, touching her stomach to make sure that everything was going well after the birth. It was painful, but Adriana gritted her teeth and endured it in her own interest. Then there was lunch, for which we had to go to the canteen. The woman and the laughing woman walked slowly and strangely to the dining room, but they could sit at the table, unlike those who gave birth naturally, who could only stand in the dining room. The tables were for 4. There was a line of 15 people standing at the window, all with their own spoons and mugs. The hospital gave utensils to those who did not have any, but recommended to bring their own. Lunch was sparse, but enough to eat and not be hungry. Adriana ate everything. Miranda didn't eat cottage cheese casserole, was put off her plate, and didn't like cabbage stew. But Adriana ate even that because it helped with her digestion. After quiet hour, they'd brought in the babies again. A red-haired nurse brought them in. "Mommies, here are your babies. Now they'll stay with you until your discharge. Do you remember how to take care of them? Any questions?" "No." Adriana and Miranda answered and laughed together. It was both joyful and anxious that the babies were staying with them. "Then I'm leaving. If you need anything, go to your post." Each moved you to your side and admired the sleeping baby. When asleep, they were so sweet and defenseless. Their eyes hadn't quite opened yet, and they didn't quite see the world around them. And so the days until discharge dragged on. Getting up, washing, dressing, feeding the baby. They took turns in the dining room and tried to eat quickly so that the other could go too. During all this time, Ethan sent only one letter of congratulations on the birth of his daughter. He never wrote again. Adriana had no time to wonder what was wrong with him or where he was, probably busy with work. So deep down she wanted to hope. In a day, Adriana and the baby were to be discharged. Before discharge, all women in labor had an ultrasound to make sure everything was okay. Adriana healed on time, with no complications. Adriana left the ultrasound room and dialed Ethan. He didn't pick up for a long time, and then she heard his forbidding voice. "Hello, hi. Is it me? Have you been drinking? I had a little last night. Why? Do I have the right? I'm being discharged tomorrow. I want you to meet me. You've packed the crib, and you haven't yet. I'll do it today. So please do it. Our daughter needs a place to sleep. What are we gonna name our daughter, Betty? I like that name. All right. Chuckles, I'll need you to go and register her. It'll be done by what time you get discharged. I'll take a cab. I'll call you after 2. There'll be time to come. I've got to get ready for work. I'll go to the supervisor's tomorrow." Yes, tomorrow. Adriana put away all the unnecessary things. She looked at Miranda. She was holding her son in her arms and saying something softly to him. Adriana looked at her daughter. She was sleeping peacefully. She thought about what was ahead of her when she arrived home and had to take care of her daughter, the house, and her husband. She imagined sitting over the baby's bed at night and singing lullabies to her, Ethan smiling and taking the baby in his arms, rocking her if she cried, of them walking together with the stroller through the park. In her dreams, she was happy and peaceful. She has a family where she is loved and where she is loved. This was comforting to Adriana. Betty was eating well, sleeping well, and slowly gaining the weight she had initially lost after birth. She had quite opened her eyes by now and was looking around with wonder at everything for a little while awake, and then falling asleep again. At night, as she slept in a jumpsuit that said "Love Mommy" and Daddy on it, Adriana felt a pinching feeling in her chest and cried. She cried, wiped away her tears, and cried again. Her heart sank with emotion. The daughter was so tiny and so defenseless. "I will protect you from everything, mine, sweet daughter." Adriana made her vows to her child, and the child heard nothing and slept soundly. The next day in the morning, she was told that she could go home in the afternoon. Adriana fed and changed her clothes in the meantime. My daughter started to get ready to go home at 12 o'clock. Ethan didn't call, but her father did. "Hello, daughter. How are you doing? How's the baby?" "Hey, Dad. She's fine. She's being discharged today. Ethan's supposed to be here, but he hasn't called yet. You call me if you need anything." Dad's voice sounded kind of weird. "It's gonna be okay. Dad, I'll be in touch. Bye, daughter. Bye, Daddy. Kiss Betty for me." "Okay." After talking to her father, Adriana felt uneasy. It was unclear what was causing this uneasiness, but it wasn't going away, it was only growing. Adriana looked at her daughter to see if she was okay and dialed Ethan. No one on the other end answered, and she dialed several times. It was no use. Time was running out. The papers had already arrived. It was time to get ready to go out. Adriana dialed her father's number. She was almost crying. "Daddy, can you take a cab and come and pick us up?" Ethan won't pick up the phone. "I can, daughter. I'm all alone now. I'll come. I'm already packed. Call me when you're on your way." I put Betty on and came down. "Take my coat and my black shoes in the closet, please. I don't have any clothes." Ethan took everything away when I went into labor, and a scarf or something. "Betty has a fur envelope. Good thing I brought it. Warm clothes, too. I'll take your blanket that's in the closet so Betty won't get cold." "Okay, Daddy." Adriana ended the call and cried. Her husband came to pick her up. He decorated the car with balloons and was allowed at the gatehouse to drive right up to the exit. Miranda dressed the baby, dressed herself, shrunk. She became quite different from the Miranda she had seen on the first day. Miranda was a very beautiful young woman. She said goodbye to Adriana. "But I wish you all the best, a speedy recovery, and many happy days. Here is my phone number." Miranda held out a piece of paper with Adriana's number written on it. "Thank you, Miranda." Adriana hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. "All the best to you and the baby too. Long and joyful days together. You recover quickly too. And take care of yourself." She also hugged and kissed Adriana and took the baby in her arms. Miranda's husband came into the room, a tall, thin guy. He had shoe covers on his feet. He took the bags and was the first to leave. I waved goodbye to God, Adriana said, and walked to the window. Miranda and her husband and child had not come down yet. They were nowhere to be seen. Adriana didn't know yet that on the way out they were writing everyone out. A photographer would catch them and offer to take a family photo. Here they were finally out of the driveway. Miranda's husband walked to the car, opened the trunk, and loaded all the stuff in there. He opened the back door in front of her and took the baby from her. Miranda got into the car and her husband placed the newborn in a special seat. Adriana waved from the window. Miranda waved back. The car slowly moved off and took Miranda to her new family life with the baby. The phone rang. It was Daddy. "Daughter, I was on my way downstairs." "Daddy, please come upstairs to me. There's a shoe shine machine up there. Put on your shoes and come up to my place. I have to get my bags." "Why didn't I think of that? You old fool. I'm waiting for you." Adriana took one last look to see if she'd forgotten any belongings or documents. Everything was in order. She didn't feel like putting on makeup at all. She was upset that Ethan hadn't called and come to pick her up. Had he packed the crib? Would there be a place for Betty to sleep? And the bathtub. She'd asked him to buy one the night before she gave birth. I guess he forgot and didn't get it. How do you bathe a baby? That's how upset her father saw her. Here I am, like Betty, pretty, but let's go. The father took the bags and they went to the elevator. They went down. There he took Betty in his arms and showed Adriana the bag with her shoes and coat and scarf. Everything was lying on the bench. Adriana got around quickly. Her legs felt surprisingly good. Slipped into comfortable boots, coat, scarf, and she was ready. The steps are slippery. Let's walk carefully. You carry the baby, and I'll carry the bag and walk in front of you. A photographer came up to them. Would you like to take a picture? When he saw Adriana's tearful eyes, no, we don't want one. Adriana and her father walked out of the entrance. The car was parked outside. They didn't have to walk far. February was snowy, but today it had melted a little, and there was ice in some places. Adriana stepped very carefully, very afraid of falling. The driver got out of the car, opened the trunk, and put their things in there. The chair was already installed in the cabin. Adriana did not yet know how to buckle up the little ones. The father volunteered to help. Come on, I'm buckled in. I've worked in cabs. I know how to do it. All right, you get in the car. Don't get cold. Drive us, please, very carefully without sudden braking in potholes, avoiding everything. Got it, Chief, Cabby responded. Can we go now? Half an hour later, they were already at the hostel. The room was locked. Adriana looked for the key she always carried with her. She opened the door and was horrified. There were empty beer bottles and chip and pizza wrappers on the floor. The crib was littered with clothes. Ethan lay on the bed and slept soundly. The room was unbreathable from the smell of booze. The father frowned unhappily. Daughter, let's go to our place. We'll get you a room. No, Dad. I can handle it. Just help me. What do you say? Dad set the bags down, opened the window. Adriana put Betty on the bed and began to disassemble the crib. Father found a bag and collected bottles and packages in it. Half an hour later, the room took on a lively appearance, and Ethan still hadn't woken up. Daughter, what shall we do with him? I want to beat him up, the bastard. How could he get drunk on a day like this and not pick you up from the hospital? I'll never forgive him for that. Daddy, I'll take care of it. Thank you so much. Adriana hugged her father and kissed his prickly cheek. Can you go? Let me go to the store and buy you some food. Daughter, I'm not leaving you. All right. Make sure you buy milk and bread and whatever you want. I'll be back soon. If he tries to hurt you, I'll be right there to put his brains in his place. All key. Father left and Adriana went to make a nest for Betty. She took out of the closet bedding, a blanket, quickly freed the crib from the military clothes on it, and shot the mattress. First put on Not My Lingering sheet, then put on the blanket on top of the usually under blanket. She used the bed instead of a personalized table, slowly untied the pink bow, unfolded the blanket. Next was to unbutton the jumpsuit and pull Betty out of it. Betty grudgingly said, Daughter, are you home now? With these words, Adriana put Betty in the crib. She started to shake her head in surprise as far as she could. Her arms and legs moved erratically. She couldn't seem to control them. And it was you, Ethan, struggling to get out of bed. I'm sorry. I was celebrating the birth of my daughter and things got out of hand. But I promise it won't happen again. You don't have to. You were supposed to pick us up from the hospital, not Dad. Adriana was angry and hurt. But I'm sorry. Please forgive me. It's my fault. I'll think about whether to forgive you or not. I am very angry with you, and there is no telling when I will be able to calm down. The idea of a soul award to raise the room is a good one. Ethan stood up, grabbed a towel, and staggered to the shower room. There was a knock on the door. His father came in and brought a whole bag of groceries: milk, bread, vegetable oil, potatoes, green apples, bananas, kefir, cooked chicken cutlets, tea, juice, cookies, and condensed milk. I've heard that when you're breastfeeding, you should drink lots of tea with condensed milk to get more milk in your breasts. Okay, Daddy, you are the best, replied Adriana. You're my daughter. How can I leave you? Where did that father choose his words? He woke up, the bastard. I sent him to the shower, and he apologized. Dad, I don't like the fact that he can't control himself. I don't like it either. Then you've got it all figured out on your own. If you don't need my help anymore, I'll go home and chew. Daddy, your folks are waiting for you. Yeah, the phone's been ringing off the hook. Where did I go? Thank you so much again. His father faced Ethan at the door, gave him a scornful look, and walked out without a word. Ethan picked up the brush and dustpan and began to sweep neatly. He got dressed and went out, took out the garbage. He walked for a long time and came back, carrying a bouquet of 9 dark pink roses. He theatrically got down on one knee and handed Adriana the bouquet. Thank you for your daughter. And forgive me. Assholes, please. I'll think about it. Please don't take too long to think about it. I want peace in our family. That Betty cried. It's time to feed my daughter. You go make something to eat. Daddy brought some cutlets to heat up and a bunch of potatoes. I'm very hungry. And obeying, Ethan took the food and went to the kitchen. Then he came for a pot with a skillet. Adriana was feeding Betty, and there was something sacred, magical, mesmerizing about it. Ethan admired it. Everything's ready. I'll set the table. I just can't have no alcohol. Have you chosen your ration yet? I've only had one drink. I'm not gonna do it again, honestly. We have to celebrate your arrival. Ethan set the table, brought a steaming pan of potatoes and cutlets from the kitchen, put them on a rack, took out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses from the cupboard, which the Commandant Kelly had given them for their wedding. Adriana had already put Betty to bed and sat down at the table, put potatoes on for herself and Ethan, cutlets each, poured juices for herself, a glass. Ethan opened the bottle and filled his glass. I want to drink to you girls, to keep you happy and healthy. Thank you, Adriana replied dryly. She drank the juice and began to eat greedily. Did you buy a bathtub? No, but my neighbors promised to give me theirs. It's almost as good as new. Yeah, only 2 kids have bathed in it. But I'll buy a new one. Tomorrow you want to buy it today? Yeah, we're having our first bath. We'll invite Kelly. She's like a mom to us. She sure is. But cheers. Ethan chugged a glass of wine and began to pour another. Wait, you said you'd only have one. Can I have a couple more? I don't feel like having one. I have to meet you properly. You said you wouldn't have any more. I gave my word, and I kept it. 2 drinks, that's all. But we'll see. They had dinner. Ethan had 3 glasses of wine, Adriana 3 glasses of juice. Ethan wasn't lying. He didn't pour any more, but saved it for tomorrow. Betty woke up from the window, and Adriana went over to the crib, rocked her, then took the baby in her arms, sat on the bed, and began to feed her. Ethan sat next to her and watched his wife and daughter. Betty ate and sang again. She was the perfect baby, at least for now. Ethan put his arm around Adriana's shoulders. I'm sorry, okay? I've missed you guys so much, but it's only been a week. Yeah, there's always late nights at work. My name is, as a young professional, I can't say no, or I won't be accepted. Okay, at work, but at home. Why drink at home? Adriana asked. But the neighbors came to celebrate the birth of their daughter. Yes, of course, the neighbors came and got you drunk. So much so that you forgot that you had to pick up your wife and child from the hospital. But your father took you. I knew he would, so I didn't worry. It's a big day for our family. And I wish it was you picking us up, not my dad. It turns out my dad cares more about us than you do. Yeah, I get it, and I get it. I'm sorry if you can. It really upset me. I don't know when I'm gonna get over it. Adriana put the leftovers in the refrigerator and went to the kitchen to wash the dishes. Ethan sat and watched his daughter sleep. Betty, especially, did not bother crying at night, ate well, and was gaining weight. She was a cheerful, curious girl. She was interested in everything. Adriana took the baby in her arms and walked around the room with her, naming things. Then they would go out into the corridor. Walking outside, Adriana also often took Betty out of the stroller and showed her the world. The girl would look at everything with curiosity. One day they came in from the street, and Adriana noticed that Betty was sluggish. He touched her and she was hot. The thermometer read 38.5. Adriana didn't know what to do. She called her father. Daddy, Betty is sick. She's feverish. She's lethargic. She won't eat. What do we do? Calm down, daughter. You were sick a lot, too, weren't you? What did Mommy do? Mommy undressed you and wet toweled you. Just warm water. I'll do that. Thanks, Daddy. Call me if you need anything. Tomorrow, call the doctor at home. I will. Good night. Adriana undressed the baby, took a towel, looked in a basin of warm water, and began to rub her body. Betty did not resist, breathing heavily. Adriana measured her temperature again at 38. It had come down a little. There was no sleep in either eye. Ethan had not yet come home from work. Adriana made herself some local tea and sat beside the crib. She listened and was afraid to miss the warning signs of something bad. She had read a lot about childhood diseases, knew that there were very severe forms, and children sometimes died from them. She couldn't bear the thought of her daughter dying. She cried. She cried for a long time. Ethan came into the room and was frightened. What happened? Story was sick, high fever. I sat there and thought that there are diseases from which babies die, and I thought that my little girl would die. So I cried. Don't even think about it. It's just a virus. Your body's probably building up immunity. That's why you have the fever. I read about it without thinking, and I'm interested in the subject too. I was just reading an article at work today. I come home. Betty is sick. We're going to call the doctor tomorrow. We'll buy some medicine. What will she prescribe? It's nervous. I've been under a lot of stress lately. Calm down. I'm here for you, Ethan said. The next day, we called a pediatrician from the children's clinic. The doctor came, examined, and listened. Betty looked at her throat, told her to put her to the breast more often. If the temperature will be too high above 38, drink, use suppositories, and all antibiotics do not need. Don't do that, just watch for now. Here's my cell phone. If anything changes, cough or rash, call me. Adriana liked the pediatrician. She was a middle-aged woman with neat hair and manicure, spoke briefly and clearly without a lot of unnecessary words, could calm panicked moms. Adriana spent the day with Betty in her arms. If the girl fell asleep, she napped, and she fed the baby on demand. By evening, the fever had gone down and then spiked again in the morning, but not as high. Adriana stayed close to the crib, drinking tea while sitting next to it. If she went to the kitchen or to the shower, she ran back. She was afraid something had happened, but nothing happened, and Adriana calmed down. At night, she slept soundly, opening her eyes at any rustle. In the morning, changing her daughter's clothes, Adriana noticed red spots on Betty's body. She immediately called the pediatrician, frightened. Hi, this is Betty's mom. She has developed red spots on her body, and her temperature has dropped as low as 35. It's a birth virus. It's a common childhood illness. You don't need to put anything on the spots. They'll go away on their own. It's all right. Betty has done well. Come see me next week for an appointment. I'll need to have the girl measured and weighed. Thank you. I was scared out of my wits. Adriana and her daughter went to see the pediatrician once a month. The pediatrician examined the girl, measured her height and weight, and wrote it all down in her file. Soon it was time for colic. Baby Betty screamed incessantly. She took turns being carried by Adriana or Ethan. If he was home, Adriana ironed the quadruple towels with an iron and laid them on the baby's tummy. I bought special colic drops on the advice of my pediatrician, but nothing helped. Betty would go quiet and then start screaming like crazy. The whole dorm knew that Betty had colic. So Kelly came and brought fennel seeds, told Adriana to brew them and give them to the girl a little at a time. And drink it yourself, it won't hurt. Oh, thank you. My mom used to give me something like that too. And I forgot, use it already. I made them. I don't know what they're for. Then I remembered that my sister-in-law gave them to me when her granddaughter had colic. It helped. It should help Betty too. Adriana immediately went to brew the seeds, condemned them, poured them into a mug, and put them into a syringe without a needle so that it would be easier to give them to Betty. The girl, wrinkling her nose unhappily as the incomprehensible liquid was forced into her mouth, drank a couple sips and began to sip the rest. Adriana sat all wet, drank the rest of the potion, and started to change her clothes. She changed herself and changed her clothes. Betty, here, my daughter, you and I are dressed in clean clothes, and the colic will run away from us. They'll go away. Adriana really wanted to believe that. Maybe it was the potion, or maybe it was past their time. But the colic was gone. But the teeth were starting to come in. For Adriana, another marathon began. Betty cried and scrubbed, putting her fists in her mouth and drooling. Adriana bought a special ring for the little girl to chew on honestly. Betty began to scratch with pleasure at the new toy. However, not only the ring was used, but everything that little hands could grab and pull into the mouth. Mommy's finger, for example. For the first time in a week, Adriana could relax for a while. The goiter came out pretty quickly. Betty looked very funny with one tooth. Adriana took a picture of her and sent the picture to her father. He responded by taking a picture of Adriana's baby picture in a scrapbook where she was a replica of Betty with one tooth sticking out of her mouth too. Dad, I don't remember that. How can you remember that? You were just a baby, always chewing on my finger with your songs. We used to give you a crust of bread to make it easier. Do you remember details like that? Yes, my daughter. It was an interesting time in your life. Now you're an adult with children of your own. I feel like an old man. Like an old man. Daddy, you're the youngest daddy in the world. Thank you, daughter. I wish Mom could have seen Betty. She would have been so happy. Yeah, Adriana's sad. I wish Mommy could hold her granddaughter in her arms. Betty grew by leaps and bounds. Adriana took care of her with Ethan and the house. Ethan would occasionally come home drunk from work, but he swore and swore it was the last time. Adriana put up with it for the sake of the baby, who reached for her daddy's arms, rode happily on his neck, squealed with delight when Ethan tossed her up. Adriana was afraid he would drop her one day. He almost did, but Ethan picked the little girl up just in time. After that, Adriana forbade him from tossing Betty up. Betty grew up, and it was time for Adriana to go back to work. She applied to various organizations, called the Classifieds, went to the labor exchange. She found a job as an accountant at a manufacturing firm. Their accountant was going on maternity leave, and Adriana went temporarily in her place. But there was no choice. She had no work experience at all. She graduated from the technical school thanks to the fact that she was appreciated by her teachers. They turned a blind eye to some mistakes on exams and credits, and Adriana finished the technical school well. Betty had to be taken to a daycare center before she went to work so that she would adapt faster. On the first day, Adriana brought the girl for a couple hours. On the second day, Betty stayed until lunchtime, and so it went to a full day. Betty walked without much resistance. The educators said that she sleeps well in the afternoon. She eats almost everything too. It was safe for Adriana to go to work. She made up her mind and got a haircut. Not a bright manicure, bought new leather shoes and a skirt. Monday morning, the alarm clock rang. For Adriana, a new phase of life was beginning. Life went on as usual. Adriana worked, took Betty to daycare. Ethan disappeared at work and still drank in the evenings, though he swore every time that he would quit. Adriana silently tolerated everything, both her husband's absence at the right moments and his wild lifestyle. Until one day there was an incident that put an end to Adriana's family life. It was an ordinary weekday. Adriana took Betty to the daycare center, waved goodbye through the window, went to the bus stop, habitually got on the bus, and came to work. The working day passed a little nervously. They were preparing reports for statistics. I had to stay for half an hour. Adriana finished the last report. She put all the documents in a folder and took them to the chief accountant. Suddenly, the phone rang. It was the kindergarten teacher. Hello, Betty fell and broke her lip. There's a lot of blood. It's probably going to have to be stitched up. Adriana grabbed her jacket and ran out of the office. On the way, shouted that she was going to the hospital with the baby. Called a cab, and in 20 minutes was already at the daycare center. All the kids had already left. Betty was sitting on a bench and sobbed often. She covered her mouth with a handkerchief. Adriana ran up to her daughter and squatted down in front of her. "Daughter, does it hurt a lot?" Betty could only moo. Adriana transferred her daughter and hailed a cab. She told the driver to take her to the emergency room of the trauma ward. When they got there were a lot of people sitting there. Betty quietly sobbed and called for tears. She had no more strength. Finally, they were invited in by two young doctors in green suits and caps. They examined the wound. A young nurse prepared all the instruments. Adriana held her daughter's hands. When the baby was injected with anesthetic, she began to scream and burst out. Adriana used her last strength to calm her daughter, but it did not help much. Another nurse came to the rescue. While the stitches were in place, Adriana managed to mentally die several times. Betty's eyes swelled with tears. Suddenly, one of the doctors pulled a small doll with big eyes out of his pocket. Betty became silent and stared at it intently. The doctor put the dolly in Betty's palm and said, "You did good. The operation was very difficult. You were screaming, but you made it through. And that's why this doll goes to you. Thank you, doctor." Adriana didn't know how to thank him. She only now felt dead tired and wanted to sleep. "Please take care of yourself." They walked out of the hospital building. They had to walk down a long alley to the road. They walked slowly and in silence. Betty was silently looking at the dolly. What did the doctor give her? She had already thought of a name for her, Zoya. So they reached the bus stop where Adriana hailed a cab. They sat in the back seat and charged each other. That's how they drove to the hostel. When they entered the room, they saw Ethan and two other men at the table. They were drinking and snacking on whatever they found in the fridge. Adriana burst into tears, and the new ones are eating out of here fast. "You can't see the baby with the stitches. She's in pain and needs to rest. And you're here drinking vodka and smoking. Ethan, how could you even think of such a thing? You promised me you wouldn't drink anymore." "I can't wear this anymore," she cried. Ethan stood up and swung a punch at Adriana. She swayed but did not fall. In response, Adriana lunged at him and started hitting his face, his shoulders, everything she could reach. A beastly rage awoke in her. Betty in the corner screamed, "Mommy, don't, Daddy, don't." The men, seeing what was wrong, stood up, grabbed Ethan, and sat her down. Adriana quickly put on her jacket, dressed Betty, grabbed her bag, and they ran out of the room. Already downstairs, Adriana stopped. Where to go at night? Commandant Kelly was on the spot. She looked out the door and was horrified. "Adriana, Betty, what's the matter with you? Come in here at once." "Oh, Kelly." Ethan led the men into our room. They were drinking, smoking. When I started to object, he hit me. Can you believe it? That bastard. That's one word for it. And he's a child abuser. He's completely brain dead. "Where are you going to go?" "I don't know. I'll call my dad, but we're not welcome there, and there's no room. But they'll let us in for a while, until I find a place to live. I'm not letting you go to your father right now. You're not thinking of dragging a child out in the middle of the night." "What happened to her lip?" "Yes, it did. We went to get stitches." "Oh my God, my sweet girl." Kelly took Betty in her arms, put her on her lap, held her close and stroked her head and shoulders. "What is Kelly doing to me?" "I don't know yet, but I can tell you this. If a man raises his hand on you once, he'll raise it a second time and a third, until he kills you. How many times have I seen that happen? Run away from him, girl, and run where? You can stay here for now. I've got plenty of room. I don't come here often. I've got another room. I'll put my papers there. Can you go get my stuff when he goes to work? I got a 12 o'clock. I've got towels, and I've got my green, and I've got my absorbent cotton. and I got a stitch. Thank you, Kelly. You're so good. You're like my mom. I feel like a daughter to you too, don't I? My baby died when she was 2 from the effects of meningitis. Ever since then, I always look at girls her age as my daughter and see her in them. I'm sorry. When did you get over it? I worked nonstop, changed everyone, never took a day off until they forcibly kicked me out. Was it hard? Very hard. I cried into my pillow at night, mourning my little girl. God never gave me any more children. You're all like my babies. Kelly walked over to Adriana, hugged and kissed her cheek, stroked Betty's head, and went to her den. Here is the key closes the whole thing. It's warm in here, and you mustn't be disturbed by anyone. I am usually found in the little den. Good night. Good night. The commandant went out with the magazine and the files. Adriana undressed Betty and put her on the bed. She sat down on the chair next to her, thought, undressed, and lay down. Sleep came quickly. This time she dreamed that she was riding on a high-speed train and the fields and towns rushed by. They were traveling together with Betty in a compartment where there was no one but them. The conductor brought 2 glasses of tea in metal cups, put them on the table next to each other, put 2 lumps of sugar and 2 teaspoons. The tea had lemon in it. Adriana took 2 tickets from the table and saw that they were going far away to the big city. Betty pushed Adriana in her sleep with her foot and she woke up. The dream did not continue. In the morning, Adriana called the head accountant and explained the situation. She gave her permission to take the day at her own expense because Adriana was the fastest to turn in the reports. Ethan should have gone to work by now. The woman looked at her sleeping daughter, went out and closed the door. She went up to her room and carefully opened the door with her key. Ethan was not in the room. Adriana quickly gathered all of her belongings, Betty, her own, carried into the room. The commandant then went upstairs once more and picked up the dishes. The room was a mess, bottles and cigarette butts lying around. There was encore in. Adriana opened the window and started to air it out. Then, remembering that she hadn't picked up her papers, she took out her marriage certificate and birth certificate. Betty put everything in a folder. Family life was over. After a little thought, Adriana took a piece of paper, sat down at her desk, and wrote Ethan a goodbye note notifying him that she could no longer live with him and that she was filing for divorce. Wrote that he could see him whenever he wanted, but only when he was sober himself. Folded the sheet and left it on the table. On her side of the house, Adriana was doing chores. Molly had to be fed. Betty was due to arrive soon. Michael came home glum. Adriana got worried. Is something wrong? Your face is gone. You look pale. I don't feel well. Let's rest up. You'll eat. I made you a nice dinner. I don't feel like eating. My stomach hurts a lot. Yesterday it hurt, and I noticed blood yesterday. I don't like it. Go see a doctor, please. I'll go to the doctor's office tomorrow. Whatever they say, I'll go there for sure. Betty arrived. She set down her bag, hugged Adriana, said hello to Michael, and went into the house where Molly immediately ran up to her. Betty started a game of hide and seek with her. Molly loved to hide, but she was always easy to find because there was always something sticking out. Betty would immediately become blind and could never find the girl. Molly would laugh and yell, "Here I am," and ran out of hiding. Betty, Molly, go get your supper already, girls. Adriana put food on a plate for the girls and sat down next to them and drank currant leaf tea. She liked their flavor very much. Mommy, I passed my exams. Good, you're my clever daughter. I never doubted you. You did well in school, and I didn't have to sit in class with you. You've been so focused and serious since you were a kid. All that's left is a diploma, and that's it. I'll finish this technical school. What are you planning to do next? I don't know yet. If I can't get in this year, I'll go to work, of course. You'll get in. You're smart. I'm smart too. Molly held her head up proudly. Of course you are. When Adriana and Molly came into the room, Michael was already asleep. Adriana lay quietly beside him and thought how much she loved him. She had never trusted anyone since Ethan, and it was a miracle that Michael had been able to melt her heart. With these thoughts, Adriana fell asleep. She had a dream in which she and Michael were walking through the meadow. Michael was holding her hand. They came to the bank of the river and looked at the other side. There were boats standing there. The bank was high and precipitous. Suddenly, the ground under Michael began to move, and he collapsed down. Adriana ran along the shore and tried to get down and help him, but it was in vain. The current there was swift and the river was deep. Michael was swept away, and she never saw him again. In horror, Adriana jumped up. Michael was here beside her, so near and dear. Adriana calmed down, lay down, and did not dream again until the morning. In the morning, Michael went to the clinic. He was given a list of examinations and tests that he had to undergo. He had time to take a general blood test, biochemistry, and do an electrocardiogram. All the week, Michael went to the offices and underwent the examination. He was frightened by the changes in his body. The doctor's verdict was disappointing. Colon cancer with metastasis to the lymph nodes. Michael didn't know how to tell Adriana. She was expecting their child, their son. He really wanted to hold his son in his arms, to go fishing with him, but apparently he wouldn't have to. The doctors said that with timely treatment, there's a 65–90% chance of survival, so he would try everything to be cured. Adriana was getting ready to pick up Molly at daycare. Michael walked into the house and silently made his way to the room. Adriana came out and went to get her daughter. Michael opened the oncologist's report one more time. Yes, that's what it was. Cancer. The prognosis was disappointing. It was devastating. Is this really it? He's still so young. Michael hoped the chemotherapy would help. Next week, he was to go to the oncology center. He'd be treated there. They would try to treat the tumor this way. Adriana and Molly came home from daycare. They met Betty outside and went into the house together. The mother-in-law was outside and gave them a look. Michael made dinner and set the table. My girls came to wash their hands at the table. I don't invite twice. In a flash, we all went to the bathroom to wash our hands. Molly was lax with Betty. Adriana was nudging them towards the table. Everyone was seated. Michael looked at everyone carefully, wanting to memorize their features. He couldn't believe that he didn't have much time left to live. Michael, you've been acting strange lately. What did the doctors say? Adriana, it's serious. It's bad. I have cancer. They're gonna have to do an MRI in stage 2 or 3 to confirm the diagnosis. And I've already been scheduled for chemotherapy. Michael Adriana didn't know what to say or how to find the words. The ground was once again falling away from under her feet. Could it still be okay? There are treatments, aren't there? They didn't tell me anything. I'm going to the oncology center for treatment in a week. Then they'll do an MRI, and then they'll decide my fate. Jesus, where did this thing come from? You were fine. Yeah, I had a stomachache once in a while, but who doesn't? What can I do for you right now? Adriana's heart was breaking in pain. Only she had built a happy family life, as a terrible disease takes away her beloved husband. Girls, let's not be sad. We're all around each other now, and I love you all, and we love you. Molly and Betty looked at him. We're going to get through this. I believe that too. Otherwise, what kind of head of household would I be? I will definitely wait until my son is born and rock his cradle. Of course, honey, of course. Adriana could hardly hold back her tears. A week later, Michael packed his things and went to the hospital. He told her not to visit him until he called her. Adriana was very upset, but decided to be strong and focused, no matter what. Michael and the kids need her. She would not give up. Every day they had long conversations with Michael. Sometimes he would say he was in for treatments and ask her not to call them for a few hours because he was nauseous. Adriana had broken through to visit him several times, but he wouldn't allow it. He didn't want his wife to see him weak. He really wanted to beat the disease and do everything to do so. The course of chemotherapy had already lasted a month. After it, Michael had a magnetic resonance imaging study. He was found to have metastases in the bladder, prostate gland, and lymph nodes. Doctors suggested surgery. Adriana lost weight, became like a shadow. She moved mechanically, did her job, took care of the children. But her thoughts were with Michael. He gave her permission to come, and she rushed to him. On leaving work, Michael looked exhausted. All his hair had fallen out. He was often nauseous, although all the necessary medications were prescribed. A catheter was secured in one arm. The tubing from it guided the IVs. Adriana took Michael's other arm in her hand, was sluggish and lifeless. There wasn't much left of the old Michael, only his eyes. Adriana loved looking into his eyes and seeing her reflection in them. She sat in silence and prayed fervently. The doctor came in and asked Adriana to leave the room. They are about to perform procedures. I will write to you when I can write. Michael's voice sounded quiet. Goodbye, sweetheart. Adriana tried to walk calmly out the door, but as soon as she got out, she cried. She tried to hold back, but she was not succeeding well. She got dressed and went outside, let her feelings come out and screamed. The tension was too high. There were trees all around, rare people passing in the distance. Everything went on as it was. People were born and died. There was nothing new. The moon looked at her indifferently from the sky. And I won't give it to you, old woman with a scythe. Adriana stopped suddenly. Her tears had dried. She was overwhelmed with determination. She quickly walked towards the road, and there caught a cab. Already in the cab, she started reading articles about this type of cancer. The more she read, the more her hope for Michael's recovery melted away. She arrived home already broken and with a heavy heart. Michael was not released from the hospital, and the doctors continued to prepare him for surgery. The surgery was a success. The rehabilitation process was already underway. Michael was beginning to feel better. Adriana asked everyone she knew to pray for Michael. She herself went to church and put candles in the candles. She didn't know how else she could help him. Her mother-in-law would come and take Molly to her house. She got old and stopped. She was worried about her son too. She didn't say anything to her daughter-in-law. She came silently and left silently. Molly did not like to go to her grandmother, but the latter lured her with new toys and books. The girl was afraid to offend her grandmother and played at her place for a while. Then she said she wanted to go to her mom. The mother-in-law would take Molly by the hand and lead her to her sister-in-law. Betty supported her mother as best she could. She stayed with Molly. When Adriana went to the hospital, she cleaned the house, did the dishes, went grocery shopping. She tried not to cross paths with her mother-in-law, and when she met her mother-in-law on the street, she politely said hello and went on without stopping. My mother-in-law never stopped, only grumbled and followed. Tied around my son's neck, bloodied his leg. It was December, and he seemed to be on the mend. The doctors continued chemotherapy. Adriana traveled to see him every day like she was going to work. At work, she was released unconditionally because she was a good worker. She did things well and on time. If necessary, she could substitute for the accountants in any area. That day, she was making out the results of the inventory when the phone call from the city number sounded. Adriana, this is the doctor on duty at the 2nd ward of the cancer center. I'd like to inform you that your husband Michael passed away at 2:20 p.m. I'm so sorry for your loss. You can come and get a death certificate. Yes, I will. Adriana answered mechanically, like a robot. She sank down on a chair from around the corner. From all sides, female employees came to her to comfort her. One employee was told by the chief accountant to escort Adriana to the hospital and asked the driver to take her. Adriana, I ordered that now you girls will get material aid from the cash register. Only write a statement later. Such grief, girl. Thank you. Adriana sat with puffy eyes and could not believe what was happening. Then everything was like a fog. Hospital, certificate, registry office, receiving burial allowance. Ritual agencies agreed that the funeral would be the next day at 14 o'clock. A farewell to the body in the memorial hall was opened from 12 to 2. Adriana walked into the house, tired and hungry. Betty poured her some hot soup. Molly put her arms around her neck. Adriana had no energy for anything. Her stomach was pulling. She lay down on the bed and immediately fell into a deep sleep. Her mother-in-law did not leave her side of the house to visit them. The next day, Adriana came out of the house pale and without a shadow of blush on her face. On her head, she tied a black lace scarf. She took a cab to the memorial hall, entered and saw her beloved lying in the coffin. He was so pale and so calm. Adriana walked over and put her hand on his, and her hand was ice cold. "You are far away from me now, and you won't be tortured anymore." Adriana's eyes were dry, all her tears. She had cried the day before, her stomach pulling hard. From the pain, Adriana couldn't stand for long and sat down on the bench next to her. Michael was approached by friends and relatives. Her mother-in-law wailed near the coffin, how the blood of her saint lived. Adriana listened to it all aloofly. When it was time to go to the cemetery, she sat quietly on the bench near the coffin and remained silent the whole way. When the hearse stopped, Adriana got out and saw the open hole of the grave and the cross beside it. The movers carried the casket out and placed it on a special stand for those who didn't have time to say goodbye. She kissed Michael on the forehead and stepped back. The coffin was lowered into the grave, her happy family life being lowered into the grave along with it. Adriana suddenly felt sick. Something hot was pouring down her legs. She went into labor and screamed. Her mother-in-law suddenly woke up, looked at Adriana with hatred, and shouted that you and your children should not be in my house. Find another place to live tomorrow. Adriana had already called an ambulance. It took her to the maternity hospital where she gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. He was so much like Michael. In the future, the fate of Adriana and her children turned out well. She moved away from her mother-in-law to a small town where the authorities gave her rented accommodation. Adriana took up her favorite hobby of candle making and created her own brand Warmth of Your Soul. Orders came in from all over the world. There was plenty of money to go around. Her daughters and son lived with her. But before that, the situation was quite dramatic. Adriana had returned from the maternity hospital to her half of the house with her young son and wanted nothing more than quiet and warmth. Betty helped her get home and prepared everything to welcome the new family member. Adriana and the late Michael wanted to name their son William. That is how she registered the boy, Dimitri. Betty babysat William, and Adriana went to process the birth certificate. It was extremely lonely and difficult for Adriana. Even though there were 3 children at home, everything in her chest ached with grief and a sense of loss, as if a part of her had been taken away. Looking at little William, she saw Michael. She remembered how he dreamed of taking his son in his arms and spent hours sobbing into her pillow, sitting at night by her little son's crib. Her mother-in-law came to her room in the morning, tried to talk to her about something, but Adriana politely escorted her away, saying, "William, it's time to eat," and so on. Adriana needed time to recover from the labor and recover a little. She didn't have the strength to fight with her mother-in-law, to defend herself against her attacks. She missed her husband so much, she wanted to hide behind him, to be snowy and weak. But the mother-in-law was not going to stop. This time she came into Adriana's room and demanded that she put candles in front of the portrait and around the room so that Michael's soul could stay with us. Why so many candles? 1 is enough. So you want the memory of my dead son. Just because I don't put candles all over the house doesn't mean I don't love or remember Michael. And then there's the leftover smell of candles. Little William was starting to have a bad cough. The baby was turning red and choking. The mother-in-law wouldn't stop. "I guess you're eating the wrong things, trying the wrong things. Seeing that the baby has a cough at all. Have you started it?" How many times Adriana tried to oppose her and explain the cause of the cough, to ask her to remove the candles, but all the requests had no effect on her mother-in-law. She did not consider Adriana as a full member of the family. One morning, while Adriana was on her way to a doctor's appointment, the mother-in-law lit many candles in Adriana's room and left. Little William was lying in a crib. He began to cough and gasp violently. At that time, the flame of one candle spread to the curtains, and they caught fire. Where did they go? The acrid smoke spread through the room. Good thing Betty was home in the kitchen at the time, making dinner. She rushed her half Adriana and jumped into the room, quickly grabbed the baby out of the crib and ran out. Neighbors ran up and quickly doused the resulting fire. When Adriana returned home, she was greeted by a cold, damp, smoke-ravaged room and a gasping William. She cleaned the room, ventilated it, removed all the candles and smoke-missing bedspreads, strictly forbade her mother-in-law to light any candles in front of William. You can only burn them in your room. It's not good for William to inhale their smoke. He may die from his father's wreaths. You don't love my son, and William has nothing to do with it, the woman replied. However, it was necessary to call an ambulance to the child, injected with antihistamines, because the nasopharynx began to swell. William soon fell asleep. This is how the confrontation between the mother-in-law and Adriana lasted. The father-in-law did not interfere, preferring to keep neutral. But then Michael's brother intervened. It turns out that he has nowhere to live, and he and his family soon plans to move here on Adriana's half. He and Michael did not have time to register the building, and it turned out that Adriana was on the street. William was already 6 months old. It was summer outside. Adriana packed all the things she planned to take with her, ordered a truck, and the whole family drove to a small town to Adriana's sister's house. The woman agreed to shelter the family until Adriana found a place to live. The woman went to the local administration and explained the situation, saying that she had been kicked out of her home with her children. The local head promised her rented accommodation, and in the future she would be able to put her children in a kindergarten. A month later, the housing was provided. Adriana and her sister went to see the apartment. It was quite tolerable. Just wallpaper, paint the windows, and the three of them could move in with her sister and her husband. They quickly made a small repair, and now it was time to take things apart in the new place. There were 3 small rooms in the apartment. The girls were in one, Adriana was in one with William in another, and the third was like a living room. The furniture, of course, was not enough, but it did not embarrass them. Gradually, the neighbors began to give their still good furniture. So Adriana and her children got a closet and a kitchen table. Stools and beds had to be bought in installments. Life was getting better. Betty became quite grown up and independent. She was already working and bringing home a paycheck. Adriana would take a little for groceries and leave the rest to Betty. One day, Betty introduced Adriana to her fiancé, Sam. They planned to get married in the fall, when the work on the cottage, which was Sam's father's, was finished. He was a widower, lived at the cottage in the summer, and traveled from there to work. The apartment was left to the young. Adriana met Jack when they came to matchmaking. It was easy for her to communicate with him. There were many common topics of conversation and shared interests. Soon his father proposed to Adriana.